My wife said she respects only people she loves, and I'm not one of them. So I changed the locks, canceled every privilege in my name, and called her father pickup was tonight. No one argued. Well, here's the thing about second chances. They're like buying a lottery ticket after you've already been screwed over by the first one. You know the odds are garbage, but hope makes you stupid, and stupid makes you optimistic. My name is Marcus Hale, and at 42, I thought I had this whole learning from mistakes thing figured out. Spoiler alert, I absolutely did not. 3 years ago, I met Isabella at one of those fancy charity events where rich people write checks to feel better about their existential dread. You know the type, overpriced champagne, silent auctions for trips to Tuscany that nobody actually wants to take, and enough fake smiles to power a small town. I was there because my company expected it. She was there because, well, I never really figured out why she was there. Maybe she smelled opportunity the way sharks smell blood in the water. Isabella was the kind of woman who didn't just walk into a room, she commanded it. Magnetic doesn't even begin to cover it. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person worth talking to, even when you could see other guys orbiting around her like planets around the sun. Her laugh was infectious. Her smile could melt steel, and when she looked at you with those dark eyes, it felt like she was seeing straight through to your soul. Of course, what I thought was deep connection was probably just her calculating my net worth. But hey, hindsight is 20/20 and love makes you blind as a bat. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Here I was, a divorced dad with more baggage than a cross-country flight. And this incredible woman was actually interested in me. Not just interested, she seemed genuinely excited about building something together. She talked about family dinners, weekend trips, maybe even kids of our own someday. It was like someone had handed me a script for the life I'd always wanted but never thought I'd get a second shot at. Now, let me be clear about my situation going into this romantic comedy turned horror movie. I had 2 kids from my first marriage, Clara, who's 11 and sharp as a tack, and Jonah, who's 9 and has enough energy to power a nuclear reactor. My ex-wife Sarah and I had managed to split without completely destroying each other or traumatizing the kids too badly, which in today's world basically makes us candidates for sainthood. The kids spent half their time with me, half with her, and I was doing my best to be the kind of dad who shows up to every soccer game and still remembers to pack lunches that don't consist entirely of Pop-Tarts and good intentions. Isabella came into this ready-made family situation like she was born for it. She didn't have kids of her own, but she had big dreams about what we could build together. She talked about being a stepmom like it was her calling, about creating traditions and memories, about giving Clara and Jonah the stable, loving home they deserved. She painted this picture of Sunday morning pancakes and family game nights and vacations to Disney World where nobody fights about money or whose turn it is to change a diaper. And me, I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. Because when you've been through a divorce, especially one that left you questioning whether you're actually capable of making anyone happy, meeting someone who seems to believe in your potential feels like winning the emotional lottery. Isabella made me feel like I wasn't just some divorced dad trying to figure out how to microwave dinosaur chicken nuggets without setting off the smoke alarm. I was a man worth loving, worth building a life with. I gave her everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Financial stability? Check. I paid for her to go back to school and get her graduate degree in marketing, because she said she wanted to build something meaningful and contribute to our future. That little investment set me back about 40 grand, but I figured it was an investment in us, in our shared dreams, in the woman I was planning to spend the rest of my life with. The house? Yeah, I bought us a house. Not just any house. A 4-bedroom colonial in one of those neighborhoods where the homeowners association sends you passive-aggressive letters if your grass is half an inch too long. It had a big backyard for the kids, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and enough space for all of us to spread out and be comfortable. I put both our names on the deed because, hey, we were building a life together, right? And then there was her family. Oh, her family. The Morenos treated me like their personal ATM from day one. But I was so busy being in love and feeling grateful that someone like Isabella chose me that I didn't see the red flags until they were practically slapping me in the face. When her parents needed help with their mortgage after her dad's retirement didn't go as planned, guess who stepped up? When her sister Gabrielle needed someone to co-sign for her car loan because her credit was trashed, Guess who got voluntold to help out? Every family emergency, every financial crisis, every just this once request landed on my doorstep with a smile and a promise that they'd pay me back eventually, that I thought I was being a good husband, a good son-in-law, a good man. I thought effort and generosity and showing up every single day would build the kind of love that lasts. I thought that if I just tried hard enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, I could create the perfect family I'd always wanted. I thought love was something you could earn through sheer determination and an open wallet. But here's what nobody tells you about effort. It's only valuable when the other person recognizes it, appreciates it, and reciprocates it. When someone takes your effort for granted, when they start to see your sacrifices as their entitlements, when your generosity becomes an expectation rather than a gift, you're not building love. You're building resentment on both sides, and setting yourself up for the kind of fall that leaves you wondering how you got so lost. Sometimes the people who don't want to see your effort are determined to stay blind to it, no matter how bright you try to shine. You know how they say the devil is in the details? Well, turns out the devil also lives in casual conversations over morning coffee and arguments about who forgot to pay the electric bill. The thing about marriage falling apart is that it doesn't happen all at once like in the movies. There's no dramatic music, no rain-soaked confrontation in a parking lot. Instead, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one so small you barely notice until you're bleeding out on your own kitchen floor. The cracks in our perfect little suburban dream started showing up about 6 months after we moved into the house. At first, they were hairline fractures, the kind of thing you could convince yourself was normal relationship stuff. Every couple has their issues, right? Every marriage goes through rough patches. I was a divorced guy, so I knew that relationships took work, that love wasn't always butterflies and rainbow unicorns farting glitter. But Isabella's issues weren't the normal, "You never put the toilet seat down," or "Why do you leave your socks on the bathroom floor?" complaints that most couples navigate. No, Isabella had a special talent for making comparisons that felt like psychological warfare disguised as casual conversation. She'd mention her ex-boyfriend Derek, who apparently was some kind of cross between Ryan Gosling and a motivational speaker. According to Isabella, Derek was passionate, the kind of guy who would surprise her with weekend trips to Napa Valley and write her poetry that didn't suck. Then there was Miguel, who was charming and could make her laugh until her sides hurt. Miguel apparently had this way of making every day feel like an adventure, even if they were just going grocery shopping or binge-watching Netflix on a Sunday afternoon. Isabella would get this dreamy look in her eyes when she talked about how Miguel could turn a mundane Tuesday into something magical just by being himself. And let's not forget about Jason, the ambitious one who was apparently destined to change the world one brilliant business idea at a time. Jason had vision, Jason had drive, Jason had the kind of magnetic personality that made everyone want to be around him. Jason also, coincidentally, never seemed to have any actual money. But Isabella glossed over that little detail whenever she brought up his many wonderful qualities to it. First, I tried to be understanding about these trips down memory lane. Look, I'm not an idiot. I know that everyone has a past, and I didn't expect Isabella to pretend that I was her first relationship or that she'd never cared about anyone before me. Hell, I had my own history with Sarah, and there were things about my ex-wife that I still respected and appreciated. But there's a difference between acknowledging your past and using it as a weapon against your present. Every time Isabella brought up one of these paragons of masculine perfection, I felt a little smaller, a little less adequate, a little more like the consolation prize she'd settled for when the really good guys got away. I started second-guessing everything, the way I dressed, the way I talked, whether I was interesting enough or funny enough or spontaneous enough to keep her attention. I bought books on being more charismatic, started planning surprise date nights, even considered taking salsa dancing lessons because apparently Miguel was an amazing dancer that I told myself it was just insecurity talking, that Isabella didn't mean anything by these comparisons. Maybe she was just sharing her life with me, trying to help me understand who she was and how she'd gotten there. Maybe I was being too sensitive, reading malice into what was probably just nostalgia. After all, she'd chosen me, right? She'd said yes when I proposed. She'd moved into our house. She was building a life with me and the kids. Actions speak louder than words, and her actions said she wanted to be with me. But then came that night in November when everything shifted, when the paper cuts finally hit something vital, and I started hemorrhaging all over our brand new hardwood floors. We'd been arguing about money, specifically about how Isabella's credit card bills had somehow ballooned to the point where the minimum payments were eating up a significant chunk of our monthly budget. I wasn't trying to be controlling or unreasonable. I just wanted to understand how someone could spend $3,000 at Target in a single month. Like, what do you even buy at Target that costs $3,000? Did she purchase the entire housewares section? Was she stockpiling toilet paper for the apocalypse? Isabella got defensive, which I should have expected, but instead of just admitting that maybe she'd gone a little overboard with the retail therapy, she started attacking me for being cheap and controlling and obsessed with money. She accused me of trying to micromanage her life, of treating her like a child who couldn't be trusted with a credit card. She said I was sucking all the joy out of our relationship by constantly worrying about stupid things like budgets and financial responsibility. That I tried to stay calm, tried to explain that I wasn't trying to control her, that I was just concerned about our financial future, especially with 2 kids to think about. I reminded her that we had goals. We talked about maybe having a baby together someday, about taking family vacations, about saving for Clara and Jonah's college funds. All of that required some level of financial planning and restraint. That's when she looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Not angry, not hurt, just cold and matter of fact, like she was explaining something obvious to someone particularly dense. The temperature in the room seemed to drop about 20 degrees as she delivered the words that would replay in my head for months afterward. I only respect people I love, she said, her voice steady and emotionless, and you're not one of them. The silence that followed was deafening. Not the kind of silence that falls between people who are too angry to speak, but the kind that happens when someone has just dropped a nuclear bomb in the middle of your living room, and you're still trying to figure out if you're dead or alive. I stood there like an idiot, trying to process what she'd just said, trying to find some way to misinterpret or misunderstand words that were pretty damn unambiguous. She didn't say it in the heat of anger, didn't scream it or throw it at me like verbal shrapnel. She said it calmly, like she was commenting on the weather or telling me we were out of milk. I looked at this woman who was wearing the engagement ring I'd spent 2 months' salary on, who was standing in the house I'd bought for us, who'd eaten the dinner I'd cooked an hour earlier, and I realized I was staring at a complete stranger. Or maybe I was finally seeing her clearly for the first time. In that moment, everything clicked into place with horrible, crystal-clear precision. I wasn't her husband. I was her placeholder. I wasn't her partner. I was her convenience. All those comparisons to Derek and Miguel and Jason suddenly made perfect sense because they were the men she'd actually loved, actually respected. I was just the guy who paid the bills. Ever notice how once someone shows you who they really are, you can't unsee it? It's like one of those optical illusion pictures where you're staring at what looks like a vase, and then someone points out the 2 faces looking at each other, and suddenly you can't see the vase anymore no matter how hard you try. That's what happened after Isabella's little truth bomb in our kitchen. Suddenly, I had X-ray vision for all the bullshit I'd been willfully ignoring for 3 years. The morning after our "I don't respect you" conversation, I woke up expecting some kind of acknowledgement from Isabella. Maybe an apology, maybe an attempt to walk back what she'd said. Hell, even just some awkwardness about having nuked our marriage from orbit the night before. Instead, she was sitting at the kitchen island scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened, sipping coffee from the mug I'd bought her that said, "World's Best Wife." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Morning," she said without looking up, like she hadn't just casually informed me that our entire relationship was built on a foundation of her complete and utter lack of respect for me as a human being. That's when I started really paying attention to the little things I'd been brushing off as quirks or personality differences. Like how Isabella had this charming habit of cutting me off mid-sentence whenever we were talking to other people, usually to correct something I'd said or add her own commentary that completely derailed whatever point I was trying to make. I'd always told myself she was just enthusiastic, just eager to contribute to the conversation. Turns out, what I'd interpreted as enthusiasm was actually her way of letting everyone know that my opinions weren't worth listening to. Take our dinner party the previous weekend with the Johnsons from down the street. I was telling them about this documentary I'd watched about sustainable farming, and Isabella literally held up her hand like a traffic cop and said, "Oh, Marcus is on one of his environmental kicks again. Did you guys see that new Netflix series about the serial killer in Wisconsin?" Just completely steamrolled right over me like I was some boring uncle at Thanksgiving that everyone tolerates but doesn't actually want to hear from. And the eye rolling. Jesus, the eye rolling. I started keeping a mental tally of how many times Isabella's eyes did a full 360 whenever I asked her for what I thought were perfectly reasonable things. "Could you pick up my dry cleaning since you're going to be near the strip mall anyway?" I roll. "Would you mind not leaving your coffee cups all over the house for me to collect like some kind of caffeinated Easter egg hunt?" I roll. "Do you think we could maybe discuss major purchases before you make them?" I roll so dramatic it probably registered on the Richter scale, but the real education and how little respect I commanded in my own house came from watching how the Moreno family treated me. Isabella's parents had never exactly rolled out the red carpet for me, but I chalked that up to normal protective parent stuff. Every father thinks no man is good enough for his precious daughter, right? Every mother-in-law has opinions about how her daughter could have done better. I figured they'd warm up to me eventually once they saw how much I loved Isabella and how well I provided for her. Richard Moreno, Isabella's father, was a retired judge who carried himself like he was still presiding over cases from his lazy-boy recliner. The man had perfected the art of looking at me like I was something he'd accidentally stepped in during his morning walk. Every conversation, we had felt like a cross-examination where I was both the defendant and already guilty of whatever crime he'd decided I'd committed. He had this way of asking questions that weren't really questions, more like statements designed to make me feel inadequate. "So Marcus, still working at that little consulting firm?" Little consulting firm. Like the company that employed 30 people and had been in business for 15 years was some kind of lemonade stand I was running out of my garage. "How's that house payment treating you?" "Pretty steep for someone in your situation." My situation being, apparently, not being wealthy enough to buy a house outright with cash like some kind of suburban drug lord. "Isabella tells me you've been doing the cooking lately." "That's modern of you." Modern. Like me making dinner for my own family was some kind of radical feminist experiment instead of just basic adult responsibility. And Gabrielle, Isabella's sister, was even worse because she wrapped her passive-aggressive bullshit in fake sweetness that made it harder to call out directly. Gabrielle had mastered the art of the backhanded compliment, the kind of comment that sounds almost nice until you really think about what she's saying. "Oh, Marcus, you're so good to Isabella. She's so lucky to have found someone who doesn't mind that she's out of his league." "Thanks, Gabrielle. Really appreciate you pointing out that I'm dating up while simultaneously making it sound like charity work. It must be nice for Isabella to not have to worry about money anymore. I mean, after all those years of dating guys who were too proud to take care of a woman properly." Translation: you're not too proud because you don't have anything to be proud of, but at least you're useful. You know, Marcus, some men would be intimidated by Isabella's education and success, but you seem really comfortable with it. Comfortable with it. Like I should be threatened by my wife's graduate degree that I paid for. For 3 years, I'd endured this death by 1,000 cuts, telling myself that family relationships take time to develop, that they'd eventually accept me, that I was being too sensitive or reading too much into innocent comments. But once Isabella confirmed that I wasn't someone she loved or respected, all those little slights and microaggressions suddenly looked different. They weren't the growing pains of blending families. They were the natural result of everyone involved recognizing that I was the weak link in the chain. The worst part wasn't even the disrespect itself. It was the realization that I'd been complicit in my own degradation. Every time Richard made some snide comment about my career, I'd laugh it off or try to prove him wrong instead of telling him to shove his opinions where the sun doesn't shine. Every time Gabrielle delivered one of her sugar-coated insults, I'd smile and nod like she was giving me a compliment instead of calling her out for being a manipulative bitch. Every time Isabella dismissed me in front of other people, I'd make excuses for her behavior instead of demanding the basic respect that every human being deserves. I'd been so desperate to make this family work, so grateful to be included in their little circle, that I'd allowed them to treat me like hired help instead of like the man who was keeping their precious Isabella housed, fed, educated, and financially secure. I'd mistaken tolerance for acceptance and submission for peace, but tolerance isn't acceptance, submission isn't peace, and being useful isn't the same thing as being valued. Once I understood that distinction, everything else started to make sense. You know what's funny about rock bottom? It's not actually the worst place to be. Rock bottom is solid ground, and sometimes that's exactly what you need to push off from to start swimming back to the surface. That Friday night, sitting in my home office while Isabella cackled at some TikTok video in the living room like she hadn't just blown up our marriage 48 hours earlier, I finally hit that solid ground. It was one of those November evenings where winter is knocking on the door but hasn't quite moved in yet. The kids were at Sarah's for the weekend, which meant the house had that weird quiet feeling it gets when there's no one around asking for snacks every 5 minutes or arguing about whose turn it is to walk the dog we don't even have. Just me, Isabella, and the sound of her completely ignoring my existence while I paid all the bills that made her comfortable lifestyle possible. I'd been going through our monthly expenses, which had become about as fun as getting a root canal without anesthesia. Isabella's spending had reached levels that would make a Kardashian blush. $3,000 at Target was apparently just the tip of the iceberg. There was also the $1,500 at Sephora because apparently she needed enough makeup to supply a small theater company. The $800 at Lululemon because regular yoga pants don't cost enough to make you feel superior to other people, and my personal favorite, the $1,200 she'd spent on something called wellness coaching, which, as far as I could tell, involved paying some woman with a fake British accent to tell her that her chakras were misaligned. But here's the thing about that Friday night. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot and messy and makes you do stupid things like throw dishes or write passive-aggressive notes that you leave on the refrigerator. What I felt was something completely different. It was cold and clear and sharp as a surgical knife. It was the kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself about what's really going on. I pulled out a yellow legal pad. Old school, I know, but there's something about writing things down by hand that makes them more real than typing them on a computer. At the top of the page, I wrote, monthly expenses, Marcus Hale pays for. Then I started making a list, and let me tell you, it was like watching a horror movie where you're screaming at the protagonist to not go into the basement, except I was both the protagonist and the person watching. The mortgage, $2,800 a month for a house that Isabella got to live in while contributing exactly $0 toward. Utilities, gas, electric, water, trash, internet, cable. Another $400 a month, so Isabella could keep the house at a tropical 75 degrees in winter while binge-watching reality shows about rich women throwing drinks at each other. Cell phones. Both lines, naturally, because God forbid Isabella should have to figure out how to pay for her own communication device. That was another $160 a month for the privilege of receiving text messages about how I was failing as a husband. Car insurance. Isabella's BMW wasn't going to insure itself, and apparently her driving record was about as stellar as her respect for me. Another $180 a month. Streaming services. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Disney+, HBO Max, Apple TV, and something called Peacock that I was pretty sure was just NBC, trying to make me pay for shows I could watch for free. Isabella had to have access to every piece of entertainment content ever created, which cost us about $60 a month. Her gym membership, $200 a month for a fancy place with eucalyptus towels and sparkling water on tap, because apparently breaking a sweat at Planet Fitness like a normal person would have been beneath her newly refined sensibilities. The credit cards. This was the big one. The financial equivalent of a tumor that kept growing no matter how much money I threw at it. Between the minimum payments on her various plastic fantastic adventures, I was looking at about $800 a month just to keep her from completely destroying our credit score. Her student loans. Remember that graduate degree I so generously financed? Well, it turns out that even though I paid for the tuition out of pocket, Isabella had still taken out loans for living expenses, which apparently meant maintaining her lifestyle while pretending to be a poor student. Another $300 a month. I sat there staring at this list, doing the math in my head, and realized that I was spending almost $5,000 a month just to subsidize the lifestyle of someone who had recently informed me that I wasn't worthy of her love or respect. $5,000. That's $60,000 a year. $60,000 annually to bankroll my own emotional abuse. But here's what really got me. It wasn't just the money. Money is just paper, just numbers on a screen, just a tool that you can earn more of if you're willing to work for it. What really twisted the knife was the realization that Isabella had never once, not even once, acknowledged that any of this was a gift. She didn't see my financial support as generosity or sacrifice or even basic partnership. She saw it as her due, her entitlement, her natural right as my wife to have me fund her existence while she treated me like something she'd scraped off her chute. I thought about all those conversations we'd had about money over the years, how she'd accused me of being controlling whenever I suggested that maybe we should have a budget, how she'd rolled her eyes when I tried to talk about saving for the future, how she'd made me feel like some kind of miser for wanting to understand where our money was going. She'd weaponized my own generosity against me, made me feel guilty for even questioning expenses that would have made a lottery winner nervous. And suddenly, sitting there in my office with that yellow legal pad and the sound of Isabella's laughter echoing from the living room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, not vindication, just a deep, bone-level calm that comes when you finally understand what needs to be done. If Isabella didn't see me as someone worthy of love or respect, then why was I acting like someone obligated to provide for her every want and need? If I was just a paycheck to her, a convenient source of funding for her lifestyle, then what exactly was I getting out of this arrangement besides the privilege of being emotionally neglected by someone with expensive taste? For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't trying to figure out how to make Isabella happy, or how to earn her affection, or how to prove that I was worthy of her love. I was simply recognizing a basic economic principle. You don't continue to invest in something that gives you no return, that I would no longer finance my own disrespect. There's something almost therapeutic about burning bridges when you finally realize they only led to places you never wanted to go in the first place. That Saturday morning, while Isabella was still sleeping off whatever wine and Netflix combo had kept her up until 2 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee, my laptop, and a sense of purpose that felt better than any antidepressant Big Pharma ever cooked up. That I'd made my decision. But now came the fun part, the execution. And let me tell you, there's a special kind of satisfaction that comes from methodically dismantling the financial safety net of someone who's spent years treating you like their personal ATM, while simultaneously letting you know that you're not good enough to deserve their basic human decency. First up, the cell phone. Isabella's iPhone was practically surgically attached to her hand, which made it the perfect place to start. I called Verizon and explained that I wanted to remove a line from our family plan. The customer service rep, bless her heart, tried to talk me out of it. "Are you sure, Mr. Hale? You'll lose the family plan discount, and it might actually cost you more to have just one line." "I'm absolutely positive," I told her, "and I need this to take effect immediately." "Well, we can do it right now, but the other phone will lose service within the hour." "Perfect. That's exactly what I'm going for." Next was the streaming services. Isabella had insisted we needed every possible platform because, according to her, missing out on the latest true crime documentary or reality show about housewives throwing wine at each other would basically be cultural suicide. I logged into Netflix first and changed the password to something Isabella would never guess: "Respect is earned 2024. Then I did the same with Hulu, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, Disney Plus, Apple TV, and that weird Peacock thing that I was pretty sure nobody actually watched. The banking was a little trickier, but not by much. I called our credit card company and explained that I needed to freeze the cards associated with Isabella's name. The representative asked if they were lost or stolen. "Not lost," I said, "but definitely not authorized for use anymore." "Sir, I need to clarify. Are these cards that you're an authorized user on, or are you the primary account holder?" "I'm the primary account holder on everything. My wife is the authorized user, and I'm removing her authorization." There was a pause. "Okay, Mr. Hale, I can certainly do that for you. The cards will be deactivated within the next few minutes. Would you like us to issue you a new card with a different number?" "That would be fantastic." The car insurance took all of 3 minutes. Isabella's BMW was insured under my policy, and all it took was a phone call to remove her from coverage. The insurance agent asked if she'd be getting her own policy. "That's between her and whatever insurance company she chooses to go with," I said. "My responsibility for her driving ends today." The gym membership was almost too easy. I logged into the account online and canceled her membership effective immediately. The system asked if I wanted to provide a reason for cancellation. I typed, no longer married to someone who respects the person paying for their membership, but then deleted it and just selected moving from the drop-down menu. No point in being petty when you're already being thorough. By noon, I had systematically removed Isabella from every financial benefit she'd enjoyed as my wife. Every privilege, every convenience, every little luxury that she'd taken for granted was gone faster than a Kardashian marriage. And the beautiful thing was, it was all completely legal and totally within my rights. Amazing how much power you have over your own money when you finally decide to use it. I made myself a sandwich, turkey and Swiss on sourdough, nothing fancy, and sat back down at the kitchen table to wait. Isabella usually didn't surface until around 1 on weekends, which meant I had about an hour to mentally prepare for what was about to be either the most satisfying conversation of my marriage or the most nuclear argument we'd ever had. Possibly both. At exactly 1:15 p.m., I heard the shower turn on upstairs. Isabella's weekend routine was as predictable as clockwork. Wake up, spend 20 minutes scrolling through social media in bed, shower, spend another 20 minutes on her skincare routine that involved more products than a small pharmacy, then come downstairs expecting me to have coffee ready and probably some kind of elaborate brunch prepared. At 1:47 p.m., I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the kitchen wearing one of those athleisure outfits that cost more than most people's car payments. Her hair perfectly styled despite having just gotten out of the shower, looking like she was ready for a photo shoot for Women Who Marry Well magazine. "Morning, babe," she said, heading straight for the coffee maker without looking at me. "What's the plan for today?" "I was thinking we could go to that new brunch place downtown, maybe do some shopping after. Anthropologie is having a sale, and I saw this dress that would be perfect for the Morrisons' party next weekend." She grabbed her phone from the counter, and immediately her face scrunched up in confusion. "Weird, I'm not getting any signal. Is the Wi-Fi down or something?" "The Wi-Fi's fine," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "Your phone line has been disconnected." She looked at me like I'd just told her that gravity had been canceled. "What do you mean disconnected?" "I mean I called Verizon this morning and removed your line from our plan. Your phone no longer has service." Isabella stared at me for a long moment, then let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Very funny, Marcus. What's really going on?" "That is what's really going on. I also changed the passwords on all the streaming services, froze your credit cards, canceled your car insurance, and terminated your gym membership. Effective immediately." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might pass out. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." I stood up and walked over to where she was standing, close enough that she could see I wasn't joking, wasn't angry, wasn't having some kind of breakdown. I was just done. "You told me 2 nights ago that you only respect people you love, and that I'm not one of them. So I spent some time thinking about what that means, and I realized you're absolutely right. If I'm not someone you love or respect, then I'm also not someone who's obligated to finance your lifestyle." "Marcus, you're being ridiculous. You can't just..." "I can, and I did. Respect isn't free, Isabella. You want to be married to someone who pays for your phone, your credit cards, your insurance, your entertainment, your gym membership, and everything else? Then you need to be married to someone you actually respect. Since that's not me, according to you, then I'm not your provider anymore." She opened her mouth to argue, but for the first time in 3 years, absolutely nothing came out. And in that moment of stunned silence, I realized something beautiful. I was finally free. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of November day where the sky looks like it's been scrubbed clean and the air has that crisp bite that makes you feel more awake than any amount of caffeine ever could. I woke up before my alarm, which was unusual, but then again, everything about the last 48 hours had been unusual. Isabella had spent most of Saturday alternating between furious silence and tearful attempts to convince me that I was having some kind of midlife crisis breakdown, but I'd held firm. No negotiation, no discussion, no, let's work this out over couples therapy bullshit. The financial support was over, period, end of sentence, but cutting off the money was just the first step. Phase 2 was about to begin, and it required Isabella to be out of the house for a few hours. Fortunately, she'd made plans to go shopping with Gabrielle, probably to complain about what an unreasonable monster I'd turned into overnight, and to figure out how to guilt me back into funding her lifestyle. What she didn't know was that while she was gone, I was going to make sure that when she came back, She wouldn't be able to get back in at 9 a.m. sharp. A locksmith van pulled into my driveway. I'd called Rodriguez and Son Saturday night and paid extra for Sunday service, which told you something about how serious I was about this whole operation. Miguel Rodriguez was a stocky guy in his 50s who'd probably seen every kind of domestic drama you could imagine, and he had the kind of weathered face that said he didn't ask questions he didn't need answers to. "You want all the locks changed?" he asked, looking at the front door, the back door, and the side entrance that led into the garage. "Everything, and I need it done fast. My wife should be gone for about 3 hours, and I want this finished before she gets back." Miguel nodded like he'd heard this story 1,000 times before. "Dead bolts too. Dead bolts, doorknobs, everything. And I need 3 sets of keys. One for me, one for my daughter, and one for my son. What about your wife? She won't be needing keys." Miguel's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight raise of his eyebrow. "All right then. This'll take me about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours tops. You want the good stuff or the cheap stuff?" "The good stuff. Money's no object for this particular project." While Miguel worked on transforming my house into Fort Knox, I tackled the next item on my agenda: packing Isabella's belongings. Now, I want to be clear here. I wasn't throwing her stuff in garbage bags and dumping it on the lawn like some kind of redneck Jerry Springer episode. I'm not a savage. I went to Target, bought a bunch of those clear plastic storage containers, and methodically packed everything that belonged to her with the same care I'd shown her for 3 years. The care she'd never appreciated or acknowledged, but care nonetheless. Her clothes filled 8 containers. 8. I'm talking about enough outfits to supply a small boutique, including shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent and handbags that probably had their own insurance policies. Her makeup and skincare products filled 2 more containers, and I swear some of those little jars cost more per ounce than gold. Her books, her knickknacks, her collection of candles that all smelled like vanilla bourbon or autumn leaves, or whatever scent was supposed to make you feel sophisticated. Everything went into containers, labeled with a black Sharpie in my neatest handwriting. The jewelry was trickier. Obviously, her engagement ring and wedding band were hers to keep, along with all the other jewelry she'd accumulated over the years. But there were a few pieces I'd given her for birthdays and anniversaries that had more sentimental value than monetary value, and I found myself hesitating over those. Then I remembered her words from Thursday night. "I only respect people I love, and you're not one of them." And into the container they went. If I wasn't someone she respected, then gifts from me probably didn't mean much to her anyway. Miguel finished with the locks. At 11:30, tested each one twice, and handed me 3 sets of shiny new keys. "You want me to stick around?" he asked. "Sometimes these situations get complicated." "No, but I appreciate the offer. I think I can handle it from here." "All right then. Good luck, man." After he left, I arranged Isabella's containers in neat rows on the front porch, covered them with a tarp in case it rained, and then went inside to wait. The house felt different somehow, lighter, like someone had opened all the windows and let out 3 years' worth of stale air. I made myself a sandwich, opened a beer even though it wasn't even noon yet, and sat down in my living room to think about what I was going to say when Isabella came home at 2:15 p.m. My phone rang. Isabella's name popped up on the screen, which was ironic considering her phone didn't actually have service anymore. She must have been using Gabrielle's phone or maybe the Wi-Fi at whatever coffee shop they'd landed in to lick their wounds and plot their counterattack. "Marcus," she said, and I could hear the barely controlled panic in her voice. "I can't get in the house." "That's correct." There was a pause, like she was trying to process the fact that I'd actually followed through on something for once instead of just threatening and then backing down like I usually did. "What do you mean?" "That's correct. I mean exactly what I said yesterday. You told me you don't love or respect me, which means I'm not your provider anymore. And if I'm not your provider, then this isn't your house. Marcus, this is insane. You can't lock me out of my own home. Actually, it's not your home. Your name might be on the deed, but you've never paid a dime toward the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, or any other expense associated with this property. Legally and practically, this is my house that I was generously allowing you to live in. That generosity has now expired." I could hear Gabrielle in the background, probably coaching Isabella on what to say, or maybe calling her own husband to complain about what an unreasonable bastard I was being. "Where am I supposed to go?" Isabella asked, and for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded genuinely scared. I honestly don't know, and frankly, it's not my problem to solve anymore. But I will say this. Your belongings are packed neatly on the front porch, covered with a tarp so they won't get wet. I suggest you arrange to have them picked up soon. This is extreme, Marcus. Marriage is supposed to be about working through problems together. You're absolutely right. Marriage is supposed to be about mutual love, respect, and partnership. But you made it very clear that you don't love or respect me, which means we don't actually have a marriage. We have a financial arrangement that I've decided to terminate. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out so long I thought she might have hung up. Finally, she spoke again, her voice smaller and more uncertain than I'd ever heard it. So that's it. You're just giving up on us. No, Isabella. You gave up on us a long time ago. I'm just finally accepting reality. If you've never had the pleasure of watching entitled people realize that their free ride is over, let me paint you a picture. It's like watching someone try to use an expired credit card at a luxury store. There's denial, then anger, then bargaining, then more anger, and finally a kind of stunned disbelief that the world doesn't actually revolve around them. I got a front row seat to this psychological circus at exactly 6:30 that evening when Richard Moreno's silver Lexus pulled into my driveway like he was arriving to foreclose on a mortgage. I'd been expecting this, of course. There was no way Isabella was going to handle this situation with any kind of dignity or self-reflection. No, she was going to run straight to Daddy and let him fight her battles for her, because that's what entitled people do when reality comes knocking. They call in the cavalry and hope that someone with more authority can bully the world back into the shape they prefer. Richard climbed out of his car wearing what I like to call his judge face, that stern, disapproving expression he'd perfected over 30 years on the bench, the one that was supposed to make you feel like you were guilty of something even if you'd never so much as jaywalked. Gabrielle emerged from the passenger side, looking like she was heading to a funeral, all black clothes and dramatic sunglasses, even though the sun was already setting. And Isabella, well, Isabella looked like someone who'd spent the day crying in coffee shops and getting her ego stroked by people telling her what a victim she was. I watched this little parade of dysfunction march up my front walk from my living room window, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete and total calm. No anxiety about confrontation, no desperate need to explain myself or justify my actions, no urge to apologize for finally standing up for myself. Just a deep, settled peace that comes from knowing you're absolutely, 100% in the right. The doorbell rang. I let it ring again. Then I heard Richard's voice through the door, using his courtroom tone like he was calling court to session. Marcus, open this door. We need to talk. I took my time walking to the front door, stopping to check my hair in the hallway mirror and straighten my shirt. When I opened the door, I was met with 3 faces that looked like they'd been expecting me to grovel and beg forgiveness. Instead, they got a man who looked like he'd just had the best night's sleep of his life. Richard, Gabrielle, Isabella. I nodded to each of them like I was greeting casual acquaintances. What can I do for you? Richard's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. What can you do for us? Marcus, this is absolutely unacceptable behavior. You cannot lock your wife out of her own home. Actually, I can and I did. And it's not her home. It's my home that I was allowing her to live in rent-free until she made it clear that she doesn't respect the person paying for her lifestyle. That's not how marriage works. Gabrielle jumped in, her voice shrill enough to shatter glass. You don't just get to kick someone out because you had a fight. I looked at Gabrielle with the kind of patience you usually reserve for explaining basic math to a particularly slow kindergartner. We didn't have a fight, Gabrielle. Isabella made a very clear statement about her feelings regarding our relationship. I'm simply responding appropriately to that information. Isabella finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a whine than actual words. Marcus, please. You're being ridiculous. You can't expect me to take everything I said completely literally. Oh, but I can, I said, leaning against my doorframe with my arms crossed. See, when someone tells you they only respect people they love and that you're not one of them, that's what we call a definitive statement. It's not ambiguous. It's not open to interpretation. It's a clear declaration of how you view our relationship. Richard puffed himself up like an angry peacock. Marriage requires patience, Marcus. You work through problems, You don't abandon ship at the first sign of trouble. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The chance to explain basic human dignity to a man who'd spent his career supposedly upholding justice, but apparently never learned the difference between respect and tolerance. Patience, I said, looking Richard dead in the eye, is built on a foundation of mutual respect. Without respect, there's nothing to be patient about. There's just one person accepting poor treatment from another person who feels entitled to give it. But she's your wife. Gabrielle protested, like that title was some kind of magic spell that made abuse acceptable. Being someone's wife doesn't give you the right to treat them like garbage, I replied. And being someone's husband doesn't obligate you to fund your own disrespect indefinitely. Isabella stepped forward, and for a moment I thought she might actually apologize, might show some recognition of how her words and actions had brought us to this point. Instead, she went straight to emotional manipulation. You're abandoning me, Marcus. How can you just throw away 3 years like they meant nothing? The audacity was breathtaking. Here was a woman who'd just spent 3 years treating me like an ATM with legs, who'd explicitly told me she didn't love or respect me, who'd compared me unfavorably to every man she'd ever dated, now trying to make me feel guilty for refusing to continue subsidizing my own emotional abuse. I'm not throwing away anything, Isabella, I said, my voice steady and calm. You threw away our marriage the moment you decided I wasn't worth your respect. I'm simply acknowledging what you already made clear. We don't have a relationship based on love and mutual respect. We have a financial arrangement that I've chosen to terminate. This is cruel and unusual punishment. Richard bellowed, apparently forgetting that he was no longer in a courtroom and that marital disputes don't fall under the Eighth Amendment. No, I said, finally letting some steel creep into my voice. Cruel and unusual punishment is spending 3 years being told you're not good enough by someone whose entire lifestyle you're funding. Cruel and unusual punishment is having your contributions ignored, your efforts dismissed, and your worth measured solely by your ability to pay other people's bills. What I'm doing is called self-respect, and it's long overdue. Isabella's composure finally cracked completely. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? I gestured toward the neat rows of storage containers on my front porch, covered with the tarp to keep them dry. Your belongings are right there, packed carefully and ready for transport. As for where you go and what you do, that's entirely up to you. You're an adult with a graduate degree that I paid for. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You can't be serious about this, Richard said. But his bluster was starting to deflate as he realized that his intimidation tactics weren't working on someone who'd finally stopped caring about his approval. I'm completely serious. More serious than I've been about anything in years. I straightened up and prepared to deliver the closing argument. Isabella made a choice when she told me I'm not someone she loves or respects. I'm simply honoring that choice by removing myself from the position of supporting someone who views me with contempt. The silence that followed was beautiful. You know what's funny about small suburban neighborhoods? Information travels faster than gossip at a church potluck, and everyone suddenly becomes a marriage counselor with strong opinions about situations they know absolutely nothing about. By Monday morning, the news that Marcus Hale had locked his wife out of their house was making the rounds faster than a stomach bug at a daycare center. I discovered this delightful fact when I stepped outside to grab my newspaper. Yes, I still get the actual paper because I'm apparently ancient, and found my neighbor Janet Peterson practically lurking behind her mailbox like some kind of suburban spy. Janet was the self-appointed mayor of our little cul-de-sac, the kind of woman who knew everyone's business and felt personally responsible for maintaining what she called neighborhood standards, which was basically code for making sure nobody did anything that might lower property values or offend her delicate sensibilities. "Morning, Marcus," she called out, with that fake casual tone people use when they're fishing for information. "Everything okay? I saw Richard's car here yesterday evening, and there seemed to be some discussion happening on your front porch." Discussion. That was a polite way of describing what had essentially been a 3-person intervention designed to shame me back into financing Isabella's lifestyle, while she treated me like something she'd scraped off her designer shoes. "Everything's fine, Janet. Just working through some domestic issues." "Oh." She looked disappointed that I wasn't going to spill all the juicy details right there on the sidewalk at 7 in the morning. "Well, if you need anything. I mean, marriage can be so challenging these days." Translation: I'm dying to know what happened, and I'm going to spend the rest of the day calling every woman in the neighborhood to speculate about your personal life. That be why the time I got to work, my phone had already started buzzing with calls and texts from people who'd apparently heard various versions of the story. My buddy Dave from college sent a text that said simply, "Dude, did you really change the locks?" My sister called to ask if I was having a nervous breakdown. Even my ex-wife Sarah texted to ask if the kids should be concerned about their living situation when they were with me. The really interesting calls, though, came from people I hadn't heard from in months. Suddenly, everyone wanted to have lunch, grab a beer, or catch up, in ways that were obviously just excuses to get the real story straight from the source. It was like being a celebrity, except instead of being famous for something cool like making movies or hitting home runs, I was famous for finally growing a backbone at age 42. The reactions fell into predictable categories. There were the people who thought I was completely justified, usually other divorced guys who'd been through their own version of this particular hell. These were the men who'd had their contributions dismissed, their efforts ignored, their self-respect slowly eroded until they finally said enough was enough. They didn't need the details. They just needed to know that someone else had finally drawn a line in the sand and refused to let it be crossed. Then there were the people who thought I was being too harsh, too extreme, too unwilling to work on the relationship. These were mostly married women who'd apparently never been told by their spouse that they weren't worthy of love or respect, or men who'd been so thoroughly beaten down by their own relationships that they couldn't imagine standing up for themselves. They talked about compromise and communication and giving people second chances, as if I hadn't spent 3 years doing exactly that while Isabella systematically destroyed whatever respect I'd once had for myself. The most interesting reactions came from people who'd actually spent time around Isabella and me as a couple. These were the friends who'd watched her dismiss my opinions at dinner parties, who'd seen her roll her eyes when I spoke, who'd witnessed the way she treated me like hired help rather than a partner. They didn't need explanations because they'd been watching the slow-motion car wreck of our marriage from the beginning. That my friend Tom, whose wife Karen was part of Isabella's little social circle, called me Tuesday afternoon with what he described as intelligence from behind enemy lines. Karen came home from coffee with the girls yesterday, and apparently Isabella is painting herself as the victim of some kind of abusive husband who went crazy and kicked her out without warning, he said. But here's the thing. Karen has eyes, and she's been watching how Isabella treats you for 3 years. She told me that if some woman talked to her the way Isabella talks to you, she'd have divorced him before the appetizers arrived. This was validation I hadn't realized I needed. For so long, I'd wondered if I was being too sensitive, if I was misinterpreting Isabella's behavior, if maybe the problem really was me and my inability to make her happy. Hearing that other people had noticed the disrespect, had been uncomfortable watching it, made me realize that I hadn't been imagining things. But the most important reactions came from the two people whose opinions actually mattered, Clara and Jonah. The kids came to stay with me Wednesday evening, and I could tell immediately that they'd heard something. 11-year-old Clara has always been perceptive beyond her years, and 9-year-old Jonah picks up on emotional undercurrents like a bloodhound picks up scents. "Dad," Clara said while we were making dinner together, "Mom said Isabella moved out." "That's right, sweetheart. Isabella and I are having some problems, and we decided it would be better if she stayed somewhere else for a while. Are you getting divorced?" Jonah asked, looking up from his homework at the kitchen table. I paused, realizing this was one of those parenting moments where honesty was more important than protecting them from uncomfortable truths. "I don't know yet, buddy. We need to figure some things out first." What surprised me was their reaction. I'd expected questions, maybe some sadness about the disruption to their routine, possibly some concern about how this would affect their living situation. Instead, Clara nodded like this made perfect sense, and Jonah just went back to his math homework. Later that evening, while we were watching a movie, Clara curled up next to me on the couch and said something that nearly broke my heart. "Dad, you seem happier now." Out of the mouths of babes. My 11-year-old daughter had noticed something that apparently half the adults in my life had missed, that living with someone who doesn't respect you is like carrying a weight you don't even realize is there until it's gone. "I am happier, sweetheart. Sometimes adults have to make difficult choices to take care of themselves. Like when you told me I didn't have to be friends with Megan anymore after she was mean to me. Exactly like that. For the first time in months, maybe years, my kids saw their father as someone who wouldn't tolerate being treated poorly, someone who valued himself enough to walk away from a situation that was making him miserable. They saw strength instead of resignation, boundaries instead of endless accommodation. And that, more than anything else, told me I'd made the right choice. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for the universe to start delivering some poetic justice with a side of humble pie. 3 weeks of Isabella discovering what life looked like when you actually had to pay for your own phone bill, your own car insurance, your own overpriced lattes and wellness coaching sessions. 3 weeks of reality crashing into privilege like a freight train hitting a BMW. I heard about Isabella's new circumstances through the neighborhood gossip network, which was more efficient than the CIA when it came to gathering intelligence. Janet Peterson had apparently made it her personal mission to track Isabella's post-lockout life, like some kind of suburban war correspondent. According to Janet's sources, and let's be honest, Janet had sources everywhere, Isabella had moved in with Gabrielle temporarily, which was already causing tension because Gabrielle's husband wasn't thrilled about having his sister-in-law's drama disrupting his peaceful home life. But the real entertainment came when Isabella tried to maintain her previous lifestyle without my financial support. Apparently, she'd gone to Target expecting to drop her usual $1,000 on whatever caught her fancy, only to discover that her credit cards weren't just frozen, they were canceled. The cashier had to cut up her Visa right there at the register while a line of soccer moms watched the show. Janet described it as quite the spectacle, which in Janet's world was basically the equivalent of calling it a Category 5 disaster. Isabella had also tried to go to eucalyptus towels, only to be informed that her membership had been terminated and she'd need to pay the full initiation fee, plus monthly dues if she wanted to rejoin. Apparently, she'd made quite a scene about that too, demanding to speak to the manager and threatening to sue for discrimination. The manager, according to Janet's intelligence network, had politely explained that not paying your bills wasn't a protected class under civil rights law. The cell phone situation was particularly problematic because Isabella had apparently never bothered to learn my social security number or any of the account information needed to set up her own service. She'd been using Gabrielle's phone for everything, which was causing its own set of issues since Gabrielle's husband was getting tired of his wife's phone being tied up with Isabella's social life and job search drama. Yeah, job search. Turns out when you don't have someone else paying for your every need, you actually have to work for a living. Who could have predicted that shocking development? But the real wake-up call came when Isabella tried to find her own apartment. See, having your name on a deed doesn't mean much when you've never actually paid any of the associated expenses. Isabella had no credit history in her own name, no proof of income, no rental references, and no savings account because she'd spent every penny I'd ever given her on maintaining her lifestyle. Landlords, it turns out, want tenants who can actually pay rent, not tenants who can explain at length why their estranged husband should pay their rent. I learned all of this not because I was stalking Isabella's misfortunes, but because people kept calling to update me like I was following some kind of reality TV show. My buddy Tom was particularly good at gathering intelligence through Karen, who was still part of Isabella's social circle and therefore had front-row seats to the ongoing disaster. She tried to get a job at that marketing firm downtown, Tom reported during one of our weekly phone calls. Apparently, the interview didn't go well when they asked about her work experience, and she had to explain that she'd been focusing on her marriage for the past 3 years. Focusing on her marriage. That was a creative way to describe spending my money while treating me like I was beneath her notice. Yeah, and when they asked for references, she put down your name. They called you yesterday, didn't you get the message? I had gotten the message, actually. A very professional woman from Henderson Marketing had called to verify Isabella's employment history and character references. I'd been polite, but honest. Isabella had never worked during our marriage. I'd financially supported her graduate education, and while she was intelligent and capable, I couldn't speak to her work ethic or professional reliability since I'd never observed either in a work context. I'd wished the company luck with their decision and hung up. Isabella didn't get the job, but the most interesting development came on a Thursday evening when my phone rang and Richard Moreno's name appeared on the screen. Not Isabella calling from someone else's phone, not Gabrielle trying to mediate, Richard himself, calling me directly for the first time in 3 years. Marcus. His voice was different, less commanding, more tired. Richard, what can I do for you? There was a long pause, the kind of silence that happens when someone is swallowing their pride and finding it tastes worse than they expected. I wanted to talk to you about Isabella. Okay. She's struggling, Marcus. This whole situation has been very difficult for her. I waited. I wasn't going to make this easy for him by jumping in with reassurances or apologies. If Richard wanted to have this conversation, he was going to have to actually have it. She's living with Gabrielle, but that's not working out well. She can't find a job, can't get approved for an apartment, can't even get a decent cell phone plan because she has no credit history. That sounds challenging, I said, my voice carefully neutral. Marcus, I think I owe you an apology. Now that was unexpected. Richard Moreno apologizing to anyone was like finding a unicorn in your backyard. Theoretically possible, but not something you'd ever actually expect to witness. For what? For not understanding what you were dealing with. For treating you like you weren't good enough for our family when you were the one holding everything together. The silence stretched out between us, filled with 3 years of condescension, dismissal, and casual disrespect that we were both remembering. Isabella called me crying yesterday, he continued. She said she never realized how much you did for her until it was gone. She said she thought you'd always be there, that you'd always take care of everything, no matter how she treated you. And what did you tell her? I told her that respect should never be realized in hindsight, that it should be practiced daily, in the moment, when it matters. For the first time in our entire relationship, Richard Moreno wasn't arguing with me. He wasn't trying to prove I was wrong, wasn't defending Isabella's behavior, wasn't making excuses for his family's treatment of me. He was actually agreeing with me. She wants to talk to you, Marcus. She wants to try to work things out. I know. She's been calling. Are you going to talk to her? I looked around my house, my peaceful, drama-free house where I could eat dinner without being ignored, watch TV without being dismissed, and go to bed without wondering what I'd done wrong that day. Maybe, but not because she's struggling, and not because she finally realizes what she lost. If I talk to Isabella, it'll be because she's learned something about respect that goes deeper than just missing her lifestyle. Richard was quiet for a long moment. That's fair, Marcus. That's more than fair. When we hung up, I realized something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't the problem that needed to be solved. I wasn't the one who needed to change, compromise, or try harder. I was finally the one whose boundaries were being respected. For months. That's how long it took Isabella to figure out that pride doesn't pay rent and entitlement doesn't cover car insurance. For months of living in the real world where your charm doesn't get you a discount at the grocery store and your magnetic personality doesn't convince landlords to waive security deposits. 4 months of discovering that when you've spent 3 years treating your husband like an ATM with legs, you might actually have to face some consequences for that choice. The call came on a rainy Tuesday in March. Not a dramatic storm or anything cinematic, just one of those steady drizzles that makes everything look gray and makes you want to stay inside with a good book and a cup of coffee. I was doing exactly that when my phone buzzed with Isabella's name. Her actual name this time, not Gabrielle's phone or Dad's phone, like the previous dozen times she'd tried to reach me. Marcus? It's Isabella. I know. Your name came up on my phone. A pause. In the old days, that would have been her cue to launch into some speech about how I was being cold or unreasonable. Instead, she just took a breath and kept going. I was wondering, could we meet somewhere? Just to talk. About what? About us. About what I did. About what I said. Her voice was different, smaller, less certain, like someone who'd been knocked down a few pegs and was still figuring out how to navigate from a lower altitude. I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like a chance to explain. I looked out my window at the rain, at my peaceful neighborhood where I could now walk around without wondering if the neighbors were judging me for not being good enough for the woman who lived in my house. I thought about Clara and Jonah, who'd been sleeping better at my place, laughing more, acting like kids instead of walking on eggshells around an adult who might roll her eyes at them for existing too loudly. Okay, coffee shop on Maple Street, Saturday at 10 a.m. 1 hour. Thank you, Marcus. Really, thank you. Saturday morning came with one of those perfect spring days that makes you believe in new beginnings and second chances. I got to the coffee shop 15 minutes early, Not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to be settled and centered before whatever conversation we were about to have. I ordered my usual black coffee, found a corner table, and watched Isabella pull into the parking lot in a Honda Civic that had definitely seen better days. She walked in looking like a completely different person from the woman who'd left my house 4 months ago. Gone were the designer clothes and the perfect hair and the general air of someone who expected the world to arrange itself around her comfort. This Isabella looked tired, a little worn around the edges, like someone who'd been learning some hard lessons about how the world actually worked. "Hi," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Thanks for agreeing to meet. You said you wanted to explain. So explain." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was trying to draw warmth from it. And for a moment, she looked younger, more vulnerable than I'd seen her since those early days when I thought we were building something real together. "I was cruel to you, Marcus. Not just the night I said I didn't respect you, but for months before that. Years, really." She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Actual remorse. Not the performative kind designed to get her way, but the real thing that comes from understanding the weight of your own actions. "I took everything you did for granted. I treated your generosity like it was my right instead of your choice." "Yes, you did. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I didn't understand what I was doing. I thought love meant never having to worry about money or bills or any of the practical stuff because someone else would always take care of it. I thought respect was something you earned once and then just had forever. And now I know that respect is something you give every day in 1,000 small ways, or you lose it. I know that when someone takes care of you, it's not because they have to, it's because they choose to. And when you make someone feel like their choice doesn't matter, like they're just a provider instead of a partner, they stop choosing you." I sipped my coffee and studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, the little tells that would indicate this was just another performance designed to get her life back to the comfortable level she preferred. But what I saw was something different. A woman who'd been broken down by reality and was trying to figure out how to build herself back up into someone worth respecting. "Isabella, I appreciate you saying all of this. I really do. But apologies don't undo 3 years of being treated like I wasn't good enough for you, while simultaneously being expected to fund your lifestyle. I know they don't." She leaned forward, her eyes serious. "I'm not asking you to take me back, Marcus. I'm not even asking for another chance, not yet. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to you, to us. I wanted you to know that you were right to draw that line, to refuse to accept being treated that way. That was unexpected. I'd been prepared for tears, for promises to change, for elaborate schemes to win me back. I hadn't been prepared for her to tell me I'd been right to kick her out. What are you asking for then? Time. Space to become someone who actually deserves your respect instead of just expecting it. I got a job, not a great one, but it's a start. I'm living in a studio apartment that's about the size of our old walk-in closet, and I'm learning to budget and pay bills and take care of myself like an actual adult." She smiled, and for the first time in years it looked genuine. "It's humbling as hell, but I think I needed to be humbled. And after you've learned all these life lessons, after I've learned them, really learned them, not just intellectually but in my bones, maybe we could try again. Not picking up where we left off, but starting over. Building something based on actual mutual respect instead of whatever it was we had before." I finished my coffee and looked at this woman who'd been my wife, who'd shared my bed and my house and my life, while making me feel like I wasn't worthy of basic human decency. She was different now, that much was clear. Whether she was different enough, whether the change was deep enough and permanent enough to matter, remained to be seen. "Isabella, I'm not the same man who bought you that engagement ring 3 years ago. I'm not the man who would subsidize his own disrespect because he was so desperate to be loved that he'd accept being tolerated instead. That man is gone. I know, and honestly, I'm glad he's gone. You deserve better than what I gave you." We sat in silence for a moment, two people who'd shared a life trying to figure out if there was anything left worth salvaging. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now you continue learning how to be someone worth respecting. And I continue being someone who won't accept anything less than that. Maybe someday those two people will be compatible. Maybe they won't. But either way, I'm not compromising on the respect part ever again." She nodded like she understood, like she finally got it. That's fair. That's more than fair. As we left the coffee shop and walked to our separate cars, her Honda Civic, my BMW that I no longer had to share with someone who treated me like hired help, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: possibility. Not certainty, not the desperate hope I'd clung to during our marriage, but genuine possibility. Maybe Isabella would continue growing into someone capable of the kind of respect that made love meaningful. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe we'd find our way back to each other on terms that actually worked for both of us. Maybe we wouldn't. But for the first time in my adult life, I knew with absolute certainty that I wouldn't settle for anything less than what I deserved. I'd rebuilt my life with my kids, with peace in my home, with the knowledge that boundaries weren't suggestions, they were requirements. Love without respect was just expensive loneliness. And I was done paying that price. Whether Isabella figured out how to offer something better remained to be seen. But I'd already won the only prize that really mattered, myself back, and that was more than enough to build a life on. My wife refused intimacy for months, then suddenly wanted a baby. I already suspected she was pregnant, so quietly planned the revenge she never saw coming. When she announced her surprise pregnancy at dinner, I smiled and said, "Congratulations, honey." Then I put it on the table. Her face went pale. Let me tell you something about marriage that nobody mentions in those cheesy wedding vows or on those inspirational Instagram posts with the sunset backgrounds and the overly filtered happy couples. Nobody tells you that one day, you might wake up next to someone who treats you like you're a roommate she tolerates instead of a husband she actually chose. My name's Marco Alvarez. I'm 35 years old, and for the past 3 months, my marriage has been hooked up to life support, beeping along with all the enthusiasm of a DMV waiting room on a Monday morning. The exact moment everything went south, right around the time my wife Clarissa decided that intimacy was too exhausting. Yeah, you heard that right. Too exhausting. Like we were training for some kind of Olympic sport instead of just, being a normal married couple who occasionally remembered why they got hitched in the first place. Every single night, like clockwork, I'd get the same rehearsed line delivered with the emotional depth of a teenage cashier asking if I wanted fries with that. "Not tonight, Marco. I have a headache." At first, I bought it. I'm not a monster. People get headaches. It's a thing. But after week 3 of this never-ending migraine marathon, I started doing the math, and let me tell you, the numbers weren't adding up in my favor. Apparently, her migraines were clocking in more hours than I was at my actual job, and I work in construction management where 12-hour days are considered taking it easy. I'm talking about headaches that mysteriously appeared right around bedtime, but somehow never interfered with her ability to scroll through her phone for 2 hours straight, thumbs moving faster than a teenager sexting their crush. Funny how that works, right? Once upon a time, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and we actually liked each other, we were that couple. You know the type. The ones who couldn't keep their hands off each other, who'd sneak away from parties early just to get home faster, who made other couples either jealous or nauseous depending on how secure they were in their own relationships. We had chemistry, passion, all that romance novel garbage that you think is exaggerated until you actually experience it yourself. But now the only thing Clarissa touches religiously is her phone, and let me tell you, she treats that device like it contains the nuclear launch codes and the secret recipe for Coca-Cola combined. Face down on the nightstand. Always. Screen locked tighter than Fort Knox. Passcode changed so many times I stopped trying to keep track. And if I so much as glanced in its direction when it buzzed, she'd snatch it up faster than a seagull grabbing a French fry at the beach. I used to think marriage was supposed to be about teamwork, like those corporate posters with people climbing mountains together or rowing boats in perfect synchronization. 2 people working together toward common goals, supporting each other through the good times and the bad. All that wholesome nonsense they feed you at wedding ceremonies while everyone's crying and pretending they believe in forever. Turns out, at least in my case, marriage is actually about pretending not to notice when your wife sleeps like a crime scene chalk outline on the absolute furthest edge of her side of the bed, practically hanging off the mattress like she's trying to establish her own zip code. We've got a king-sized bed, king-sized people. And somehow this woman manages to make it feel like we're sleeping in different area codes. There's this invisible demilitarized zone running straight down the middle of our mattress, and God forbid any part of my body crosses that border. I once accidentally brushed her leg with my foot while I was sleeping, and you'd think I'd committed a war crime from the way she jerked away and huffed like I'd personally offended her ancestors. The thing that really gets me, though, is how gradual it all was. It's not like she woke up one morning and decided to completely check out of our marriage. No, this was a slow fade, like watching a movie where the volume decreases so gradually that you don't notice until suddenly you can't hear anything anymore and you're just staring at moving pictures that don't make any sense. First, it was just once or twice a week with the headaches. Then it became every other night. Then it became every single night, with occasional variations like, I'm too tired, or my stomach hurts, or my personal favorite, I just don't feel like it, delivered with the same enthusiasm someone might use to decline a timeshare presentation. And me? Like an absolute chump, I just accepted it. I nodded, said, okay, no problem, kissed her on the forehead like some kind of understanding saint, and rolled over to my side of the bed to stare at the ceiling and wonder what the hell happened to my life. I tried everything, and I mean everything. I planned romantic dinners. I bought flowers, not just the gas station carnations either, but actual nice arrangements from that bougie place downtown that charges you like they're selling pieces of the Sistine Chapel. I suggested weekend getaways, couples massages, even one of those paint and sip classes that I absolutely did not want to attend, but was willing to suffer through if it meant reconnecting with my wife. Every suggestion was met with the same exhausted sigh and a list of reasons why now wasn't a good time. Work was too stressful. She needed to focus on her health. We should save money. The excuses multiplied faster than rabbits on fertility drugs, each one more creative than the last, and I just kept accepting them because what else was I supposed to do? Stage an intervention about why my wife wouldn't sleep with me? That's not exactly the kind of conversation you can have over breakfast without sounding like either a sex addict or the most pathetic man alive. Looking back now, knowing everything I know, I can see all the signs I missed. Or maybe I didn't miss them. Maybe I saw them and just chose to ignore them because acknowledging the truth would mean admitting that my marriage was circling the drain faster than my dignity. But back then, in those 3 months of bedroom exile, I was still operating under the delusion that this was just a rough patch, a temporary thing that all couples go through. I actually Googled, wife not interested in intimacy, at 2 in the morning like some desperate loser, scrolling through forum posts from other rejected husbands trying to find some explanation that didn't involve the obvious answer nobody wants to consider. Maybe it was hormones. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was literally anything except what it actually was, which I'd find out soon enough in the most soul-crushing way possible. But we're not there yet. Right now, I'm still in the denial phase, still sleeping on my assigned side of the bed, still pretending that everything is fine when my buddies ask how married life is treating me. Great. Man, really great. I'd lie through my teeth while we watched the game at Murphy's Bar, nursing my beer and wondering if this is just what marriage becomes after a few years. Comfortable. Distant. More like a business partnership than a romance. Nobody tells you that the person who used to laugh at your terrible jokes and steal bites of your food might one day look at you like you're a piece of furniture she's considering replacing, but hasn't quite gotten around to yet. Clarissa works as a receptionist at Brightline Solar, which is one of those companies that sounds way more impressive than it actually is, like how sanitation engineer is just a fancy way of saying garbage collector. Her job, and I'm not exaggerating here because I've actually visited her workplace, consists of answering phone calls, scheduling appointments, and her absolute biggest responsibility of the week, buying donuts on Fridays. That's it. That's the entire job description. She sits at a desk in an air-conditioned office that's nicer than most people's living rooms, answers maybe 20 calls a day from customers who are already pretty much sold on solar panels anyway, and occasionally waters the sad little succulent plant that sits next to her computer monitor. Yet somehow, and this is the part that really kills me, she comes home every single day looking like she just finished a double shift mining coal in the Arizona desert during summer. We're talking full-on exhaustion, like she's been building pyramids with her bare hands instead of forwarding emails and asking people if they'd like to hold or leave a voicemail. Every evening, it's the same dramatic entrance. The door opens. Her purse hits the counter with the weight of someone who's carrying the troubles of the entire world, and she lets out this long, theatrical sigh that could win her an Oscar if exhaustion porn was an actual movie genre. I'm so tired. She'll announce to nobody in particular, kicking off her shoes like even her feet are personally victimized by her brutal work schedule. Then she collapses on the couch with all the grace of a wounded gazelle, grabs her phone, always the phone, and proceeds to scroll through social media for the next 3 hours with the dedication of someone who's definitely not too tired to double-tap Instagram photos of people she hasn't talked to since high school. The energy she puts into maintaining her online presence could power a small city, but asking her to have an actual conversation with her husband? Sorry, babe, too exhausted for that. Need her to load the dishwasher? Can't do it, completely wiped out. Want to actually spend time together like we're married? Absolutely impossible. She's practically on her deathbed from answering phones all day. I tried calling her out on it once, about 2 months into this whole exhausted wife routine she'd perfected. She dragged herself through the door with her usual performance, and I was standing in the kitchen making dinner. Chicken stir-fry, because I'd also become the designated chef in addition to all my other roles, and I just couldn't help myself. Rough day at the office? I asked, trying to keep my tone light and not like a husband who was approximately 3 seconds away from losing his mind. She looked at me like I'd just asked her to explain quantum physics and said, in that voice people use when they think you're being deliberately obtuse, Marco, you have no idea how stressful my job is. I had to physically bite my tongue to keep from laughing because, actually, I didn't know exactly how stressful her job was. 0% stressful. That's the stress level. I wanted to say, really, Clarissa? Tired from what exactly? Stapler marathons? Did the copy machine stage a rebellion? Was there a hostile takeover by aggressive sticky notes? But instead, I just nodded like a good little understanding husband and went back to cooking dinner while she sprawled on the couch like a Victorian lady with consumption. The thing is, I actually have a demanding job. I manage construction projects, which means I'm dealing with contractors, city permits, safety inspections, budget overruns, weather delays, and about 17 different things that can go catastrophically wrong on any given day. I'm up at 5:30 in the morning, I'm on job sites where it's 110 degrees in the shade, and I'm solving problems that actually matter, like making sure buildings don't collapse and kill people. But do I come home and perform a one-woman show about how exhausted I am? No. I come home, I ask about her day, I cook dinner half the time, I do the yard work on weekends, and I somehow still have energy to try to maintain our marriage even though it's pretty clear I'm the only one still participating in this relationship. Meanwhile, Clarissa acts like she's training for the Olympics of being tired, setting new personal records every single day for dramatic size and strategic couch positioning. But here's where it gets really interesting, and by interesting I mean infuriating. She says she's just tired from work, and she delivers this line with the conviction of someone who actually believes their own nonsense. When I push back even slightly, suggest maybe she's not as tired as she thinks, or point out that her job isn't exactly breaking rocks in a labor camp, she rolls her eyes at me. This eye roll, by the way, has become her signature move, like a passive-aggressive finishing move in a martial arts style dedicated entirely to making your spouse feel like garbage. It's not just a quick eye roll either. It's a slow, deliberate rotation that somehow manages to convey contempt, dismissal, and a whole dissertation on what an unreasonable jerk I'm being, all without saying a single word. And then she hides behind this new smile she's developed, this weird expression that doesn't quite reach her eyes, like she's a hostage in a ransom video being forced to pretend everything's fine. That smile, man. That smile haunts me. It's not the smile I married. The old Clarissa had this genuine, full-face smile that lit up her entire expression, the kind of smile that made other people want to smile just from looking at it. This new version? It's like someone explained the concept of smiling to an alien who'd never actually seen a human being happy before. It's all teeth and no joy, a performance of happiness rather than the actual thing, and every time I see it, I feel like I'm talking to a stranger who's wearing my wife's face as a mask. She'll use it when she's deflecting, when I ask her questions she doesn't want to answer, when she's lying. Which, spoiler alert, turned out to be pretty much all the time. How was work? Creepy smile. Where were you? Creepy smile. Why is your phone always face down? Creepy smile and a subject change so smooth you almost don't notice she never actually answered the question. And then there's the perfume situation, which I didn't even clock as suspicious at first because I'm apparently the most oblivious husband in the greater Phoenix metropolitan area. Clarissa had worn the same perfume for years, this light floral thing that was nice without being overpowering, the kind of scent you'd associate with someone who works in an office and doesn't want to gas out their coworkers. But sometime around when the bedroom Olympics got permanently canceled, she switched to something else. Something expensive, judging by the fancy bottle that appeared on her dresser. Something with more presence, more intention behind it. The kind of perfume you don't wear to answer phones at a solar panel company. The kind you wear when you're trying to impress someone. But again, I'm operating in denial mode at this point. So I just figured maybe she wanted to treat herself. Maybe she was going through some kind of self-care phase. Maybe this was her version of a midlife crisis, and I should just be supportive. The wardrobe changed too. Clarissa had always dressed professionally for work, but nothing fancy. Blouses and slacks. The standard business casual uniform of receptionists everywhere. Suddenly, she's buying new dresses, tighter jeans, tops that showed a little more skin than her previous conservative style. She started spending more time on her makeup in the morning, curling her hair even on random Tuesdays, wearing jewelry I'd never seen before. When I complimented her once, told her she looked nice, she got defensive. What? I didn't look nice before, she snapped, and I realized there was no right answer here. If I noticed the changes, I was being accusatory. If I didn't notice, I was being neglectful. It was a lose-lose situation, which pretty much summarized our entire marriage at that point. The excuses changed too, evolved really, like they were adapting to survive in the wild. When I suggested dinner at our favorite Italian spot, this little place called Rossini's where we'd had our first anniversary dinner, she hit me with a new one. I'm watching my carbs, she said, not even looking up from her phone. Watching her carbs. This is a woman who used to demolish an entire basket of garlic bread before the appetizers arrived, who considered pasta a food group, who once told me that carbs were a gift from God, and anyone who avoided them was a fool. Now suddenly she's watching her carbs like they're a Netflix series she can't miss. Since when? I asked, trying to keep the suspicion out of my voice. She shrugged, still scrolling. Since I decided to take my health seriously, Marco. You should be supportive. Right. Supportive. That's what I should be while watching my marriage disintegrate in real time because my wife is too busy being exhausted from her incredibly taxing receptionist job to actually be my wife anymore. Yeah? Well, apparently, someone had been watching those carbs with her, sweetheart. Someone who made her want to look good, smell good, and maintain her energy for activities that definitely didn't involve her husband. But I didn't know that yet. I was still in the phase where I thought maybe marriage counseling could fix this, where I genuinely believed we were just going through a rough patch that all couples experience. I hadn't found the receipt yet. I was still operating under the assumption that my wife was tired from work instead of tired from living a double life. I was still that guy, the oblivious husband who makes other men shake their heads in pity when they hear the story later. You know how they say ignorance is bliss? Yeah, well, whoever came up with that phrase was absolutely right. And I wish I could go back to being ignorantly blissful instead of sitting here with knowledge that felt like someone had taken a baseball bat to my kneecaps, and then my soul for good measure. It happened on a random Tuesday afternoon, the kind of unremarkable day where you're just going through the motions of your life without expecting anything significant to happen. I was home early for once. Job site inspection got postponed because of some permit issue that wasn't my problem to solve, and I decided to be productive around the house instead of just collapsing on the couch like I usually did after work. Our microwave had been making this weird grinding noise for the past week, like it was slowly dying and wanted everyone to know about its suffering. So I figured I'd dig up the warranty information and see if we could get it replaced before it finally gave up and exploded or whatever dying microwaves do. The filing cabinet in our home office is one of those things that looks organized from the outside, but is actually complete chaos once you open it, like those people who seem like they have their lives together until you peek behind the curtain and realize everything's held together with duct tape and prayer. Clarissa was supposed to be in charge of organizing our important documents, but clearly that was just another responsibility she decided was too exhausting to actually handle. So I was left digging through folders labeled things like miscellaneous and important stuff and papers, which is basically like labeling a box, things that exist. I was elbow deep in a folder marked appliances/warranties when my hand brushed against something that definitely wasn't a warranty for a kitchen appliance. It was a piece of paper, folded in half, tucked behind our insurance documents like someone had tried to hide it, but hadn't quite committed fully to the concept of actually hiding it properly. I pulled it out, unfolded it, and my entire world imploded in the space between one heartbeat and the next. It was a receipt from Planned Parenthood, dated about 6 weeks ago, printed on that cheap receipt paper that fades if you look at it wrong, but was still perfectly legible enough to destroy my life. The words jumped out at me like they were written in neon lights. Pregnancy test, consultation, positive. Those 3 words, just sitting there innocently on a piece of thermal paper, completely casual about the fact that they were about to nuke my entire existence. Pregnancy test, consultation, positive. I read it 3 times, then 4, then lost count because my brain was doing this thing where it was trying to process information but kept hitting an error message and rebooting back to the beginning. I froze like a man who'd just realized he'd been eating from the wrong plate at a potluck, except instead of potato salad it was my entire marriage that had gone bad, and I'd been consuming it this whole time without noticing the smell. My hand was shaking, actually shaking, like I was some kind of cartoon character who'd just gotten bad news, which I guess I was, except this wasn't funny, and there was no laugh track. I sat down hard on the edge of our bed, where we'd slept next to each other every night for the past however many months while she was carrying this secret like it was her personal nuclear weapon, and just stared at that receipt. The date was 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. That was right smack in the middle of the 3-month intimacy drought, right in the sweet spot of her being too tired and too exhausted, and having too many headaches to even look at me like I was anything more than an annoying roommate who occasionally tried to hold her hand. We hadn't been intimate in 3 months. The math wasn't mathing, as the kids say on the internet. Actually, the math was mathing perfectly, just not in any way that worked out in my favor. See, math doesn't lie. Math is brutally, perfectly honest. 3 months of no intimacy plus a positive pregnancy test from 6 weeks ago equals one husband who definitely isn't the father of whatever baby his wife is currently growing. I'm not great at algebra, but even I could solve this equation, and the answer was, Marco Alvarez is the biggest idiot in Arizona and possibly the entire southwestern United States. The numbers were so far from adding up that they'd actually circled back around and started subtracting. We're talking about negative numbers here, folks. We're talking about math so bad it makes those word problems about trains leaving stations at different times look simple. So I sat there on the edge of our bed, this bed we'd picked out together at some furniture store where the salesman had been way too enthusiastic about thread counts and mattress firmness, holding that receipt between my thumb and forefinger like it might explode if I gripped it too hard. The paper felt flimsy, insubstantial, like something this important should have been printed on heavier stock, maybe with gold embossing, or at least on cardstock. But no, the evidence of my wife's infidelity and pregnancy with another man's child was printed on the same kind of cheap receipt you get from CVS when you buy gum. It felt cosmically unfair that something this devastating could be documented on something so disposable, so forgettable, so easily lost in the bottom of a purse or accidentally thrown away with junk mail. I realized, sitting there, that my wife was pregnant. Actually, genuinely, legitimately pregnant with a whole human being that was currently under construction inside her body. And I wasn't the architect, the contractor, or even the guy who delivered the building materials. I was just the chump who apparently owned the property where all this unauthorized construction was happening. Some other guy had broken ground on this project, and I'd been completely oblivious, going about my day thinking I was in a normal marriage that was just going through a rough patch. Surprise. It's not a rough patch. It's a complete demolition with no plans to rebuild. It's your wife carrying another man's baby and hiding the evidence behind warranty documents for kitchen appliances, which is either the dumbest or most brilliant hiding spot, depending on how you look at it, because who actually looks at warranty documents unless something breaks? The silence in that moment was the kind of silence you could feel physically, like the air itself had gotten heavier and was pressing down on my chest. No shouting, no drama. No throwing things or punching walls like they do in movies when men find out their wives have been cheating on them. Just silence. The kind of silence where your ears start ringing because there's absolutely no sound to process and your brain is freaking out about the absence of noise. The kind of silence where you become hyper-aware of your own breathing and your heartbeat, and the way the ceiling fan makes this tiny clicking sound every third rotation that you've never noticed before in all the years you've lived in this house. The kind of silence where you hear your pride pack its bags, call an Uber, and leave the house while your dignity follows right behind it, both of them eager to get out before things get even worse. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been 5 minutes. Could have been an hour. Time does this weird thing when you're processing information that fundamentally changes your understanding of your life. It's like those movies where everything goes slow motion during the important parts, except there's no dramatic music and no heroic moment coming to save the day. Just you, a receipt, and the growing realization that you've been playing checkers while everyone else has been playing chess, and you didn't even know you were in a game until you'd already lost. I kept thinking about all those nights she'd said she was too tired. All those mornings she'd been weird about her phone. All those new clothes and the perfume and the way she'd been watching her carbs. Every single sign I'd missed or ignored or explained away because acknowledging the truth would have been too painful. But here's the thing about truth. It doesn't care whether you're ready for it or not. It doesn't wait for you to be in a good mental space. It doesn't check your schedule to see if you have time for a complete mental breakdown. It just shows up, usually in the form of a poorly hidden Planned Parenthood receipt, and slaps you across the face with reality. And reality, it turns out, tastes a lot like betrayal with a side order of humiliation and a garnish of what the hell do I do now? My wife was pregnant with another man's baby. That was my reality now. That was the thing I had to somehow incorporate into my worldview and figure out how to deal with. Not a suspicion, not a worry, not a paranoid fantasy. A documented, receipt-verified, pregnancy test-confirmed fact. I folded the receipt carefully, creasing it along the same lines it had been folded before, like maybe if I put it back exactly how I found it, I could pretend this never happened. But that's not how life works. You can't unfind things. You can't unknow information. Once you've seen behind the curtain, you can't pretend the wizard is actually magical anymore. I slipped the receipt back into the folder, behind the insurance papers, exactly where it had been hiding. Then I stood up, walked to the bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror like I was meeting myself for the first time. Who was this guy? This husband who hadn't noticed his wife was cheating on him? This man who'd believed every excuse, every headache, every claim of exhaustion? This absolute clown who'd been sleeping next to a woman carrying another man's child and hadn't suspected a thing? The guy in the mirror didn't have any answers. He just looked tired. Really, genuinely tired. Not fake tired like Clarissa after her brutal day of answering phones. Actually exhausted from carrying a marriage that only one person had been trying to save. But here's what I decided. Standing there looking at my own reflection and feeling about 2 inches tall, I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. No shouting. No accusations. No dramatic scene where I waved the receipt in her face and demanded answers. Because that's what she'd expect. That's what any normal person would do. But I was done playing by normal person rules. She wanted to play games? Fine. Game on. But this time, I'd be the one calling the shots. I didn't confront her right away, which I know sounds crazy because every fiber of my being wanted to storm into that living room and demand to know what the hell she'd been doing and who the hell she'd been doing it with. But here's what I learned about rage in that moment. It's useful only if you channel it properly. Uncontrolled anger gets you a screaming match, tears, denials, and a whole lot of nothing solved. Controlled anger? That gets you results. That gets you revenge served so cold it could give someone frostbite. So instead of going nuclear, I took about 45 minutes to get my game face on, practice my smile in the bathroom mirror until it looked natural instead of homicidal, and then I walked downstairs like absolutely nothing had changed. Like I was still the same oblivious husband who believed his wife's headaches were real and her exhaustion was legitimate, and her phone was face down for totally innocent reasons. She was on the couch, naturally, scrolling through her phone with her feet tucked under her, looking exactly like someone who definitely wasn't carrying another man's baby and destroying her marriage from the inside out. "Hey babe," I said, and my voice sounded normal, which was a minor miracle considering my internal monologue was screaming like someone had set it on fire. She looked up, gave me that fake smile that no longer fooled me for even half a second, and said, "Hey, you're home early." No guilt, no nervousness, just casual conversation like she wasn't sitting on the world's biggest secret. I nodded, walked into the kitchen, and started pulling things out of the fridge to make dinner, playing the role of dutiful husband so convincingly I should have won an Emmy. Or at least a Golden Globe. Maybe one of those Lifetime Achievement Awards for sustained excellence in the field of pretending everything is fine when your life is actually a dumpster fire. For the next few days, I was the perfect husband. And I mean perfect. I smiled at her. I asked about her day and actually pretended to care about the answers. I kissed her on the forehead before bed like a man who definitely wasn't plotting her social and legal destruction. I complimented her new perfume. I told her she looked beautiful. I was so convincing in my performance that even I almost believed I didn't know what I knew. She seemed to relax a little, like maybe she'd been worried I was getting suspicious, but now she could see I was still the same clueless Marco who wouldn't notice if she tattooed cheater across her forehead. Little did she know I was just gathering my thoughts, planning my strategy, and waiting for the perfect moment to drop my bomb in a way that would cause maximum devastation. That moment came about a week after I found the receipt. It was a Saturday morning, one of those Phoenix mornings where the sun hasn't turned the whole city into a convection oven yet, and it's actually pleasant to be alive. We were having breakfast. I'd made pancakes because apparently I was now a short-order cook in addition to all my other roles, and Clarissa was in a good mood, chatting about some drama at work involving the office manager and the new intern. I let her talk, nodding in all the right places, and then I just casually dropped it into conversation like I was suggesting we try a new restaurant. You know what? I said, pouring syrup on my pancakes with the steady hand of a surgeon or a sociopath. I'm not sure which. Maybe we should start trying for a baby. The effect was immediate and spectacular. She choked on her orange juice. Actually choked, like cartoon character level, choking where liquid came out of her nose a little bit, and she had to grab a napkin and cough into it while her eyes watered. What? She managed to croak out between coughs, staring at me like I'd just suggested we rob a bank or join a cult or do something equally insane. I kept my face completely neutral, innocent even, like this was just a normal thing to bring up over breakfast. A baby, I repeated, taking a bite of pancake and chewing thoroughly before continuing because I wanted to drag this out and watch her squirm. I've been thinking about it. We've been married for a while now. Seems like the right time, you know? Start a family. Her face went through about 17 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Panic, fear, guilt, more panic, a desperate attempt to look normal. Then finally, she landed on forced casual, which looked about as natural as a penguin in a tuxedo at a beach party. And now, she stammered, and I noticed her hand was shaking slightly as she set down her orange juice glass. I thought we agreed to wait until I get that promotion. Oh, this promotion. This mythical promotion that she'd been talking about for months, but somehow never actually seemed to materialize or even be a real thing that her boss had mentioned. The promotion that was always just around the corner, just out of reach, perpetually 6 months away no matter how much time passed. What promotion? I asked, keeping my tone light and curious instead of accusatory. The donut manager position? It was a low blow, but come on. The woman was carrying another man's baby and lying to my face about it. I think I was entitled to a few low blows. She didn't appreciate my humor, which was fair, I guess. But she also couldn't really call me out on it without revealing that her job was indeed completely ridiculous and didn't have any real advancement opportunities. She fake laughed, this horrible forced sound that a person might make if you told them at gunpoint to laugh, and her eyes were darting around the kitchen like she was looking for an escape route or maybe a trap door to fall through. Marco, that's not funny, she said, trying to sound annoyed, but mostly just sounding panicked. I'm serious about my career. Now's just not a good time. I took another bite of pancake, chewed slowly, swallowed, and then looked at her with the most innocent expression I could manufacture. Why not? We're financially stable. We have a house. We're not getting any younger. What are we waiting for? Each word was a little needle, poking at her guilty conscience. Watching her try to come up with reasons why we couldn't have a baby when she was literally already pregnant with someone else's kid. This was better than any revenge I could have gotten from just confronting her. This was art. This was watching someone dig their own grave in real time while thinking they were being clever. I need to focus on my health first, she said, which was a new excuse I hadn't heard before. Points for creativity, I guess. I want to make sure I'm in the best shape possible before we start trying. You know, lose a few pounds, get my nutrition right, all that stuff. She was babbling now, words tumbling out faster than her brain could properly organize them, and I could see the sweat starting to form on her forehead even though the kitchen wasn't particularly warm. Maybe in a year or so, we can revisit this conversation then. A year. She wanted to buy herself a year, presumably so she could figure out what to do about the baby she was already carrying, the one that would be very obviously not mine if we were supposedly trying to conceive. I nodded slowly, like I was considering her words and finding them reasonable. Okay, I said simply. I just thought it would be nice. But you're right. We should wait until you're ready. The relief on her face was almost comical. She actually sagged a little in her chair, like I'd removed a weight from her shoulders, and she gave me a genuine smile for the first time in weeks. A real one, the kind that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. She thought she'd dodged the bullet. She thought she'd successfully navigated this conversation and bought herself time to figure out her situation. She had no idea that the bullet was still coming. It was just taking the scenic route. That was my confirmation, right there in that reaction. The panic, the stammering, the desperate attempt to delay any talk of babies. If she'd been innocent, if there was no pregnancy, if I'd been completely wrong about everything, she would have just said, "Not right now," and moved on. But that reaction, that was guilt. That was someone who knew they were pregnant trying desperately to keep their husband from finding out until they could figure out how to handle the situation. I wasn't the father, but I was about to become the author of her downfall, and I was going to write that story with the attention to detail of Hemingway and the ruthlessness of a crime novelist who kills off characters for fun. The rest of that weekend, I watched her. Really watched her, now that I knew what I was looking at. The way she held her stomach sometimes, just for a second, like she was protecting something. The way she'd turned down wine at dinner. She blamed it on her health kick, but now I knew the real reason. The way she was suddenly interested in taking prenatal vitamins, which she disguised by buying a General Women's multivitamin and keeping it in the same bottle. She was covering her tracks, or at least she thought she was. But now that I knew the truth, every little action was like watching someone wave a giant red flag while insisting there was nothing to see here. I started planning. Not recklessly, not emotionally, but with the cold calculation of someone playing chess while everyone else is still figuring out how to set up the board. I needed evidence, real evidence, not just a receipt and my suspicions. I needed to know who the other guy was. I needed documentation. I needed an airtight case that would destroy her credibility completely. Because here's the thing about divorce in Arizona. It's a no-fault state, which means cheating doesn't technically matter in the legal proceedings. But it matters everywhere else. It matters in the court of public opinion. It matters when dividing assets. It matters when you're trying to avoid paying alimony to a woman who destroyed your marriage. And most importantly, it matters when you want everyone to know exactly what kind of person your ex-wife really is. So I smiled. I nodded. I kissed her on the forehead like a man who definitely wasn't plotting her destruction. I played the role of loving husband while internally I was already 3 steps ahead, planning my next moves like a grandmaster who'd just figured out checkmate was inevitable. It just needed to play out across the next several moves. She thought she was safe. She thought she'd fooled me. She thought she could keep living her double life until she figured out how to either hide the pregnancy or pin it on me or whatever her plan was. But the thing about playing dumb is that it gives you the element of surprise, and surprise is the most powerful weapon you can have when someone has already counted you out. I took the next day off work, which was a Monday, and if you know anything about construction management, you know that taking off on a Monday is basically unheard of unless someone died or you're actively dying yourself. Mondays are when everything goes wrong, when you find out what disasters unfolded over the weekend, when contractors call to tell you they can't make it or materials didn't arrive, or the city inspector has suddenly decided that thing they approved last week is now a problem. But I didn't care. I called my site supervisor, told him I had a personal emergency, which wasn't even a lie, technically, and drove straight to the office of Patricia Holt, attorney at law, located in one of those professional buildings in Scottsdale, where the parking lot is full of luxury cars, and everyone walking through the lobby looks like they either have money or are about to take money from someone else. I'd found Patricia through a buddy of mine who'd gone through an ugly divorce about 2 years ago. He'd told me she was expensive but worth every penny, that she'd absolutely demolished his ex-wife's case and made sure he kept most of his assets and didn't get stuck paying alimony for the rest of his natural life. At the time, I'd filed that information away in the hopefully I'll never need this section of my brain, right next to how to survive a bear attack and what to do if your parachute doesn't open. Well, surprise, I needed it now, and I was willing to pay whatever it cost because this wasn't about money anymore. This was about principle. This was about making sure that Clarissa didn't get to destroy my life and then profit from it like some kind of marital supervillain. Patricia's office was exactly what you'd expect from a lawyer who looked like she'd divorced half of Phoenix personally. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern furniture that probably cost more than my truck, and diplomas and certificates covering one wall like trophies from her various legal victories. She was in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, with perfectly styled gray hair that she wore like a power move rather than something to hide, and a suit that screamed, "I charge $500 an hour, and I'm worth it." When her receptionist showed me into her office, Patricia stood up, shook my hand with a grip that could crush walnuts, and gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from her massive desk. "Mr. Alvarez," she said, settling back into her own chair and folding her hands on the desk in front of her. "Tell me everything. Not, 'How can I help you?' or 'What seems to be the problem?' or any of that soft, hand-holding language that some lawyers use. Just tell me everything." Like she was a detective and I was about to confess to a crime. Except the crime was committed against me, and she was going to help me make sure the actual criminal paid for it. So I told her everything. And I mean everything. The 3 months of no intimacy, the headaches, the exhaustion from her incredibly demanding receptionist job, the new perfume and wardrobe changes, the phone always face down, and finally, the Planned Parenthood receipt that I'd found tucked behind our appliance warranties like a ticking time bomb waiting to explode my entire life. Patricia didn't interrupt once. She just sat there, occasionally making notes on a legal pad with a pen that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. Her face completely neutral like I was describing the weather instead of the collapse of my marriage. When I finished, there was a moment of silence where she finished writing whatever note she was making, set down her pen, and looked at me with the expression of someone who'd seen this exact scenario play out approximately 8,000 times before and was completely unfazed by it. "Do you want revenge, truth, or both?" she asked, and I swear to God, I almost laughed because that was such a perfectly blunt question. No judgment, no moralizing, no lecture about taking the high road or being the bigger person. Just a simple question about what I wanted out of this situation, delivered like she was asking if I wanted cream and sugar in my coffee. I looked at her, this woman who was apparently about to become my partner in legally destroying my wife's life, and I said the only thing that made sense. Yes. Just yes. Because I wanted revenge and truth, and both and everything in between. I wanted Clarissa to face consequences for what she'd done. I wanted everyone to know the truth about who she really was. I wanted her to regret ever thinking she could play me like this. Patricia smiled, and it was the smile of a shark that had just spotted a particularly juicy seal. "Then you'll need proof and patience. Think of this like chess, not boxing. Chess, not boxing. In other words, don't go in swinging wildly and hoping to land a knockout punch. Plan your moves, think several steps ahead, and slowly corner your opponent until they have nowhere left to go." She pulled out a fresh legal pad and started writing down what she called my action items, which is lawyer speak for things you need to do so I can destroy your wife in court and also in the general arena of public opinion. First item, documentation. I needed to document everything from this point forward. Every conversation, every text message, every weird behavior. All of it needed to be written down with dates and times like I was building a case file, which I guess I was. Patricia explained that in a divorce, especially one involving infidelity and a pregnancy that wasn't mine, having a detailed timeline of events would be crucial. Not just for the legal proceedings, but for my own credibility. She'd seen too many cases where the cheating spouse managed to flip the script and make themselves look like the victim, and she wasn't about to let that happen to me. Second item, financial audit. I needed to go through our bank accounts, credit card statements, everything, and look for any unusual expenses. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, gifts that weren't for me. Anything that might indicate where she'd been spending time and money on her extracurricular activities. Patricia said that 9 times out of 10, cheaters leave a financial trail that's easier to follow than breadcrumbs in a forest. They get careless, she explained. They think their spouse isn't paying attention, so they stop being careful about covering their tracks. That's when you catch them. Third item, paternity test authorization. This was the big one. Patricia needed documentation proving that the baby wasn't mine, which meant eventually we'd need a court-ordered paternity test. But that would come later, after the baby was born. For now, she just wanted me to be prepared for that step and understand that it was going to be part of the process. She explained that in Arizona, if you're married when a baby is born, you're automatically presumed to be the father unless proven otherwise, which meant that without a paternity test, I could end up legally responsible for a kid that wasn't even mine. That thought was so horrifying that I actually felt my blood pressure spike right there in her office. Fourth item, private investigator. This was where things got serious and also expensive. Patricia had a guy she worked with regularly, someone named Robert Kane, who apparently specialized in marital infidelity cases and had a success rate that would make a baseball player jealous. She explained that Robert could follow Clarissa, document who she was meeting with, get photographic evidence of the affair, and basically build an airtight case that she couldn't deny or spin into something else. It's not cheap, Patricia warned me, but it's worth it. Because when we go to court, or even if we just negotiate a settlement, having photos and documentation of her affair means she has zero leverage. She can't claim you were the bad husband. She can't ask for alimony. She can't play the victim. We take away all her weapons. I asked how much all of this was going to cost, because I'm not made of money and I had a feeling this was about to get expensive real fast. Patricia didn't sugarcoat it. Between her fees, the investigator, court costs, and various other expenses, I was looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $15,000 to $20,000, maybe more depending on how complicated things got. My stomach dropped a little because that's a lot of money, but then I thought about the alternative. The alternative was letting Clarissa get away with this, maybe even sticking me with child support for a kid that wasn't mine, possibly paying her alimony because I couldn't prove she'd been unfaithful. Suddenly 15 grand seemed like a bargain. Here's what's going to happen, Patricia said, leaning forward with her elbows on the desk, her expression serious. You're going to go home and act completely normal. You're going to be the perfect husband. You're not going to confront her. You're not going to let on that you know anything. And you're absolutely not going to do anything stupid like following her yourself or confronting the other man if you figure out who he is. You're going to let Robert do his job while you play dumb. Can you do that? I nodded, because I'd already been doing exactly that for the past week, and I was apparently pretty good at it. She continued, good. Because the moment you confront her, she's going to lawyer up, she's going to get her story straight, and she's going to make our job a lot harder. Right now, she thinks she's safe. She thinks you don't know. That's our advantage, and we're not going to waste it. We spent another hour going over details, signing paperwork, and discussing strategy. Patricia explained that once we had enough evidence, we'd hit Clarissa with divorce papers, along with all the documentation of her affair, and basically force her into a corner where her only option was to accept whatever settlement we offered or face a brutal court battle that she would absolutely lose. We're not trying to be cruel, Patricia said, though her smile suggested she wouldn't exactly lose sleep over it either. We're just making sure you don't get screwed twice. She gave me her card, along with Robert Kane's contact information, and told me to call him that afternoon to set up an initial consultation. So I left her office with paperwork, contacts, and the calm confidence of a man who knew his wife was walking into her own trap, wearing heels she couldn't afford and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The anger I'd felt when I first found that receipt had transformed into something else, something colder and more focused. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was business. This was about protecting myself legally, financially, and emotionally from a woman who decided that our marriage vows were more like suggestions than actual commitments. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, hope. Not hope that my marriage could be saved, that ship had sailed, sunk, and was currently being eaten by sharks at the bottom of the ocean, but hope that I could come out of this situation with my dignity, my assets, and my future intact. And hope that Clarissa would finally face real consequences for her actions instead of just getting away with it like so many cheaters apparently do. About 2 weeks after my meeting with Patricia, Clarissa announced over dinner, pasta, which apparently she decided was okay to eat again now that I'd dropped the baby conversation, that she needed to visit her cousin in Tucson that upcoming weekend. Her cousin, in Tucson, the same cousin who, and this is the fun part, doesn't actually exist. I know this because I've met Clarissa's entire family multiple times over the years at various holidays and family gatherings. And there is no cousin in Tucson. There's an aunt in Flagstaff, an uncle in Mesa, and a second cousin in California somewhere, but zero cousins in Tucson. But I didn't point this out because I was still playing the role of oblivious husband who definitely wasn't onto her game. So I just nodded and said, "Oh yeah? How long will you be gone?" She looked almost surprised that I wasn't questioning it. Like maybe she'd been preparing for an argument that never came. "Just Saturday," she said, twirling pasta on her fork with studied casualness. "I'll leave in the morning and be back by evening. She's going through some stuff and needs someone to talk to." The lies were coming so smoothly now that I wondered if she'd been practicing them, maybe rehearsing in front of the mirror the same way I'd practiced my fake smile. Some stuff. That's beautifully vague. Could mean literally anything. Could also mean absolutely nothing because, again, this cousin doesn't exist, and Clarissa was about to spend her Saturday doing something that definitely wasn't visiting family. I played it cool, expressing just the right amount of concern about her fictional cousin's fictional problems, and even offered to come along for moral support. The panic that flashed across her face was so quick I almost missed it, but I was watching for it now, cataloging every tell, every micro-expression that gave away her guilt. No, she said quickly. "It's kind of personal girl stuff. You'd be bored. Plus, don't you have that thing with the guys this weekend?" I didn't have anything with any guys, but I nodded anyway because she was giving me the perfect cover story. "All right, yeah? Well, tell your cousin I hope everything works out." The word cousin tasted like poison in my mouth, but I smiled through it. Saturday morning arrived, and Clarissa was up early, which should have been my first clue that something was off because this woman hadn't been up before 9 on a weekend in approximately 3 years. But there she was at 7 in the morning, showered and dressed in an outfit that was way too nice for visiting a cousin who was allegedly going through personal problems. We're talking makeup fully done, hair curled, wearing those tight jeans she'd bought recently, and a top that showed just enough cleavage to be interesting without being obvious. "Wow," I said, looking her up and down. "Your cousin must really rate if you're getting this dressed up." She laughed, that fake laugh that sounded like a car trying to start in cold weather. "I just want to look nice." "Is that a crime?" I followed her about 10 minutes after she left, which I know sounds like something from a bad detective movie. But Patricia had been clear that sometimes you need to do reconnaissance yourself before bringing in the professional. Robert Kane, the private investigator, was already on retainer and would be handling the heavy surveillance. But this was just me confirming my suspicions and getting a general idea of where she was going. I stayed several car lengths back, which is harder than it sounds when you're driving a red pickup truck that's not exactly inconspicuous. But Clarissa was so confident in her deception that she never once checked her rearview mirror to see if anyone was following her. She didn't head toward Tucson. Surprise, surprise. Instead, she drove about 20 minutes in the complete opposite direction toward Tempe, which for those of you not familiar with Arizona geography, is nowhere near Tucson. Tucson is like 2 hours south. Tempe is basically next door to Phoenix. So either her cousin had relocated without mentioning it, or, and this seemed much more likely, Clarissa was a lying liar who lies. She eventually pulled into a residential neighborhood, one of those areas with modest houses that all look vaguely similar, like the developer had one blueprint and just copied it 40 times with minor variations. She parked in front of a tan-colored house with a dying lawn that clearly hadn't been watered in weeks and a mailbox that was leaning at a 30-degree angle like it had given up on life. And then he appeared. The other guy, the homewrecker, the father of my wife's baby. He walked out of that house, and I got my first good look at the man who'd been sleeping with Clarissa while I was at work building things and trying to keep our marriage alive. He was tall, I'll give him that, probably 6'2" or 6'3", with that artificially tanned look that guys get when they spend too much time in tanning beds trying to look like they surf even though we're in the middle of a desert. He had dark hair styled with way too much product, a tribal tattoo visible on his arm, and he was wearing a tank top and basketball shorts like he'd just rolled out of bed, which he probably had. This was the guy? This was the man Clarissa had chosen over me. This was the person she thought was worth destroying our marriage for, and honestly, I was almost offended by how mediocre he looked. He walked up to her car, opened the driver's side door, and kissed her. Not like a friendly peck on the cheek. Not like a hey buddy kind of kiss. This was a full-on, romantic movie poster, soap opera-level kiss. The kind that makes it absolutely clear these two people are intimate with each other in ways that have nothing to do with casual friendship. I watched this through my phone camera, zoomed in as far as it would go, taking photos and video like my life depended on it, which in a legal sense, it kind of did. Every picture was time-stamped automatically by my phone, which Patricia had explained would be crucial for establishing a timeline. I made sure to capture the house number, the street sign, Clarissa's car with the license plate visible, and multiple angles of her and this dude together. She went inside, and they closed the door behind them, and I sat in my truck about half a block away, partially hidden behind a landscaping truck that had been conveniently abandoned there, probably by workers on their lunch break. I felt like I should be feeling something dramatic: rage, heartbreak, betrayal, maybe even jealousy. But mostly what I felt was vindication mixed with a healthy dose of disgust. Because this confirmed everything. This meant I wasn't crazy. This meant my suspicions were correct. This meant that when we got to court, I'd have evidence that Clarissa couldn't explain away or deny. She wasn't visiting a cousin. She was visiting her baby daddy, the guy who'd knocked her up while she was telling me she had headaches. While she was inside living her double life, doing God knows what with Captain Tribal Tattoo, I was outside planning her season finale, and let me tell you, I had some ideas for how this show was going to end. I called Robert Kane from my truck, gave him the address, described the guy, and told him I needed a complete background check as soon as possible. Robert, who sounded like he'd been doing this job for approximately 100 years and was completely unfazed by marital drama, told me he'd have preliminary information by Monday and a full report by the end of the week. He also said he'd set up surveillance on the house and on Clarissa to document their meetings and establish a pattern of behavior. This is good work, he told me. Most clients don't get this kind of evidence on their own. You've got a real talent for this. Yeah, well, necessity is the mother of invention. Or in this case, the mother of becoming an amateur private investigator because your wife decided to audition for the role of world's worst spouse. I waited for about 3 hours, which I spent alternating between taking photos of the house from different angles. You never know what might be useful in court, and researching Arizona divorce law on my phone. Did you know that Arizona is a community property state? That means everything acquired during the marriage gets split 50-50 unless you can prove fault. And while Arizona is technically a no-fault divorce state, meaning you don't need to prove wrongdoing to get divorced, judges can and do consider infidelity when dividing assets and determining spousal support. Translation: I had a real shot at not getting financially destroyed by this disaster. Around 2 in the afternoon, Clarissa finally emerged from the house, looking significantly more disheveled than when she'd arrived. Her hair was messed up, her makeup was smudged, and she had this satisfied glow that made me want to throw my phone through my windshield. Tank Top Tribesman gave her another kiss goodbye, this time with some additional groping that I absolutely did not need to see, but documented anyway because, again, evidence. She got in her car and drove away, probably heading back home to tell me all about her completely fictional visit with her completely fictional cousin and her completely fictional problems that required a 6-hour visit. I didn't follow her home. Instead, I sat there for another 30 minutes, just looking at this house, this completely ordinary, unremarkable house in a completely ordinary neighborhood where my wife had been having an affair. It looked like every other house on the street. Nothing special. Nothing that screamed, "This is where marriages come to die." Just a regular house with a dying lawn and a crooked mailbox. And inside was the guy who decided that sleeping with another man's wife was a totally reasonable thing to do. I wondered if he knew I existed. I wondered if Clarissa had told him she was married, or if she'd conveniently left that detail out of their relationship. I wondered if he had any idea that he was about to become a father and would be facing child support payments in the very near future. Spoiler alert, the whole situation didn't end well for either of them, but we're not there yet. Right now, I was still in the evidence-gathering phase, still playing the long game, still pretending to be the oblivious husband who definitely hadn't just spent his Saturday following his wife to her boyfriend's house and documenting their affair with the thoroughness of a professional photographer. I drove home, made sure to arrive about an hour before Clarissa would be back based on her usual timing, and started working on yard work so I'd look appropriately busy and definitely not like someone who'd just spent the day on a stakeout. When she got home, I was sweaty and covered in grass clippings, The picture of a husband who'd spent his day doing productive things around the house. "How was your cousin?" I asked, giving her a kiss on the cheek like I actually believed she'd been in Tucson. She smiled, that fake smile I now recognized instantly. "Good. Better." I think talking really helped her. I nodded sympathetically, playing my role perfectly. "That's great, babe. I'm glad you could be there for her." And the Oscar for Best Performance by a Husband Who Knows His Wife is Trash goes to Marco Alvarez. Take a bow, buddy. You've earned it. That night, I slept better than I had in months, because I had proof. I had photos. I had timestamps. I had an address, and soon I'd have a name and a background check. Clarissa thought she was playing me, but what she didn't realize was that she'd just walked into her own trap, and I'd been the one who set it. Robert Kane called me on Monday morning with preliminary information, and let me tell you, it was even better than I could have hoped for. Actually, better is the wrong word. More catastrophic? More perfectly terrible? More absolutely hilarious in a dark, karmic justice kind of way? The man's name was Jason Morales, age 32, and his life was apparently a masterclass in making bad decisions and then making even worse decisions to try to fix the original bad decisions. Robert rattled off the details with the casual tone of someone reading a grocery list, but each item was like a little gift wrapped in schadenfreude and topped with a bow made of Clarissa's terrible judgment. First off, Jason was unemployed. Not recently. I genuinely couldn't tell if I should be insulted that she'd cheated on me with such a downgrade or relieved that I was getting away from someone with such spectacularly bad judgment. The background check also revealed that Jason had a criminal record, because of course he did. Nothing super serious, no violent crimes or anything that would get him on a registry, but he had a DUI from 3 years ago and a couple of misdemeanor charges for possession of marijuana back before it was legal in Arizona. He'd also been evicted twice in the past 5 years for not paying rent, which explained why he was living in that house with the dying lawn and crooked mailbox. According to Robert, Jason was currently renting that place month to month and was, surprise, surprise, 2 months behind on rent already. This man paid for exactly nothing on time. Not his rent, not his child support, probably not his phone bill or his electric bill or literally anything else that required basic adult responsibility. I sat there in my truck. I'd taken the call in the parking lot of a job site because I didn't want anyone overhearing this conversation, just absorbing this information and trying to wrap my head around Clarissa's choices. She'd thrown away our marriage, our home, our entire life together for a guy who was basically a walking red flag convention. A man who couldn't keep a job, wouldn't support his existing child, had a criminal record, and was apparently allergic to paying bills or showing up on time for anything. This was the guy she'd chosen. This was the father of her baby. This was the person she thought was worth risking everything for, and I genuinely could not understand the math on that decision. "You sure you want to go this far?" Robert asked after he'd finished giving me the rundown on Jason's greatest hits of terrible life choices. I think he was giving me an out, checking to make sure I really wanted to proceed with the full investigation and divorce proceedings, because once you go down this road, there's no coming back. You can't unhear this information. You can't unknow what your wife has been doing and who she's been doing it with. But I didn't hesitate for even a second. "Buddy," I told him, "she went this far with Jason. I'm just catching up." Because that was the truth. Clarissa had already made her choices. She'd already decided that our marriage was worth less than whatever she was getting from a deadbeat who couldn't even support his first kid. I was just making sure I didn't get destroyed in the process of her self-destructing. Robert laughed, this dry chuckle that suggested he'd seen this exact scenario play out countless times before. "Fair enough. I'll have the complete report to you by Wednesday, along with surveillance photos from this week. We've already documented 3 more meetings between them. 3 more meetings. So this wasn't just a one-time thing or even an occasional slip-up. This was a full relationship, a whole other life she was living behind my back, and she'd been maintaining it so casually that she could squeeze in 3 meetings in less than a week while still coming home and complaining about being too tired to be my wife. The audacity of it all would have been impressive if it wasn't so personally devastating. That night, Clarissa announced that she wanted to go out to dinner, somewhere special. She'd been in an unusually good mood all day, texting me from work with little heart emojis and acting like the wife I'd married instead of the stranger I'd been living with for the past few months. I knew what this was. This was guilt making a guest appearance, probably because she was starting to feel bad about the whole having an affair with an unemployed deadbeat while pregnant with his baby thing. Or maybe she'd had a pregnancy hormone surge that made her temporarily remember she had a husband. Either way, she was trying, and I was going to let her try right up until the moment I destroyed her world with the truth. "Where do you want to go?" I asked, already knowing what her answer would be because Clarissa was predictable even when she thought she was being spontaneous. "How about La Verona?" she suggested, her eyes lighting up with what looked like genuine excitement. La Verona was our old date night spot, the Italian place where we'd gone for special occasions back when we were happy, or at least when I thought we were happy. It was nice, but not too fancy, had great food, and held enough sentimental value that suggesting it meant something. "Sounds perfect," I told her, and I meant it, because I'd been planning for this exact scenario. Patricia had prepared the divorce paperwork, I had my evidence compiled, and I'd been waiting for the right moment to present it all. Clarissa had just handed me that moment on a silver platter, or I guess in this case, on a plate of expensive Italian food. We made reservations for Friday night, and I spent the next few days acting like everything was normal, while internally I was preparing for what was essentially the nuclear option of marriage confrontations. Patricia had briefed me on exactly what to do, what to say, and most importantly, what not to do. "Don't get emotional," she'd coached me. "Don't yell, don't cry, don't give her ammunition to paint you as the crazy one. Be calm, be factual, and let the evidence speak for itself." I'd practiced this in my head so many times I could have performed it on Broadway. The calm reveal, the manila envelope, the photos and documentation, her face when she realized she'd been caught. I'd been planning this moment for weeks, and now it was finally happening. Friday came, and Clarissa spent 2 hours getting ready, which should have been my clue that she was planning something big. She wore a blue dress that I'd never seen before, probably bought during one of her shopping trips with money from our joint account that was technically my money since she barely made anything at her receptionist job. She looked beautiful, I'll give her that, and for just a second, I felt a pang of something that might have been sadness or regret, or just the ghost of what we used to be haunting me one last time. But then I remembered Jason Morales, unemployed deadbeat extraordinaire, and the sadness evaporated faster than water on Phoenix pavement in July. She held my hand across the table at La Verona, her eyes sparkling with what looked like tears, but might have just been the candlelight reflecting off her contacts. We'd been seated at a corner table, relatively private, which was perfect for what was about to happen. The waiter brought wine, though Clarissa declined hers, more evidence of the pregnancy she still hadn't told me about, and I ordered the chicken marsala while she got some kind of salad because apparently we were still pretending she was watching her carbs. She was nervous, I could tell, fidgeting with her napkin and making small talk about work and the weather and anything except what she'd actually brought me here to say. Finally, after the appetizers arrived and we'd made it through about 15 minutes of the most awkward small talk in the history of Italian dining, she took a deep breath like she was about to dive into cold water. She reached across the table and grabbed both of my hands in hers, holding them tight like she was afraid I might bolt if she didn't physically restrain me. Her eyes were definitely watering now, full-on tears threatening to spill over, and she had this smile on her face that was probably supposed to look happy, but actually looked terrified. "Marco," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "I have the most amazing news." I already knew what she was going to say. I'd known for weeks. But I played dumb because that's what we do when we're about to destroy someone's life. We let them walk into it themselves. We let them hang themselves with their own rope. We let them believe for just a few more seconds that everything is going to be okay. "Oh yeah," I said, trying to sound curious instead of like a man who was about to ruin her entire evening and possibly her entire life. She nodded, tears actually spilling over now and running down her cheeks, leaving little trails in her carefully applied makeup. "We're having a baby," she announced, squeezing my hand so hard it almost hurt. "You're going to be a dad." I gasped. I actually gasped, like I was auditioning for a community theater production of Surprised Husband Learns He's Going to Be a Father, and going way too hard on the dramatic interpretation. "No way," I said, my voice hitting a pitch that was probably a little too enthusiastic to be believable, but Clarissa was so caught up in her own performance that she didn't notice. She was crying now, full-on waterworks, tears streaming down her face and ruining the makeup she'd spent so long applying. "After all this time?" I continued, really leaning into the role. Squeezing her hands back like this was the best news I'd ever received, instead of confirmation that my wife was a lying, cheating disaster of a human being. Yes, she sobbed, nodding so vigorously I worried she might give herself whiplash. I took the test a few weeks ago, and I wanted to be absolutely sure before I told you. I've been to the doctor and everything. We're really having a baby, Marco. You're going to be a dad. The way she kept emphasizing, "You're going to be a dad," was almost funny in a dark, twisted way, like she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. Like if she said it enough times with enough conviction, it would somehow become true and erase the fact that she'd been sleeping with Jason Morales, professional deadbeat, while telling me she was too exhausted to be intimate with her own husband. Our waiter chose that moment to appear, probably drawn by the sound of Clarissa's crying, and asked if everything was okay. I waved him off with a smile. "Everything's perfect," I told him. "We just found out we're having a baby." His face lit up with that professional joy that service workers perfect over years of pretending to care about strangers' lives. "Congratulations," he said, and I swear he looked genuinely happy for us, which made me feel a little guilty, because this poor guy had no idea he was witnessing what was about to become the most uncomfortable dinner service of his entire career. He offered us champagne on the house, which Clarissa obviously couldn't accept because, pregnant. So he brought sparkling cider instead and made a big show of pouring it into fancy glasses like we were celebrating something worth celebrating. I raised my glass, looking Clarissa straight in the eyes, and said with a smile that probably looked more predatory than congratulatory, "Congratulations, honey." She clinked her glass against mine, still crying, still smiling, still completely oblivious to the fact that she'd just walked into the final act of her own tragedy. We drank, or at least I drank while she sipped at her sparkling cider like it was actually champagne, and then I slowly, deliberately, reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out the manila envelope that I'd been carrying around all evening like a loaded gun waiting to be fired. The envelope was thick, packed with documents and photos, and it made a satisfying thump when I set it on the table between us, right next to the bread basket and the little dish of olive oil. Clarissa's smile faltered slightly when she saw it, her eyes darting from the envelope to my face and back again, trying to figure out what was happening. "What's this?" she asked, her voice suddenly uncertain, the tears drying up like she'd turned off a faucet. I kept smiling, that same calm smile I'd been wearing for weeks now, the one that was starting to feel more natural than any genuine expression I'd worn in months. "Just a little surprise of my own," I said, pushing the envelope across the table toward her like I was dealing cards in the world's worst poker game. She looked at the envelope like it might explode, her hand hovering over it, but not quite touching it, like she already knew on some instinctive level that whatever was inside was going to ruin this nice dinner and probably her entire life. "Open it," I encouraged, taking another sip of my champagne, because I was going to need alcohol to get through the next 10 minutes without either laughing or throwing something. She picked up the envelope with shaking hands, and I watched as she unsealed it, pulled out the contents, and started going through the papers one by one. First came the photos. Beautiful 8x10 glossy prints that I'd had professionally developed, because if you're going to destroy your wife's life, you might as well do it with high-quality images. There she was, crystal clear and in full color, kissing Jason Morales outside his house in Tempe. Another photo of them with his arm around her waist. Another one of her going into his house. Another of her leaving 3 hours later looking thoroughly disheveled. Each photo was time-stamped and dated, printed right there in the corner like evidence at a crime scene, which I guess it kind of was. The timestamps corresponded perfectly with days she'd claimed to be visiting her non-existent cousin in Tucson, or working late at the office, or running errands that apparently took 4 hours. Clarissa's face went from tan to pale to almost gray in the span of about 5 seconds, which is impressive if you think about it, like watching a time-lapse of someone realizing their entire world is collapsing. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. She just kept staring at the photos, flipping through them one after another, and I could see her brain desperately trying to come up with an explanation that would make this okay. Some story that would explain why she was kissing and groping another man on multiple occasions while married to me. Good luck with that, sweetheart. I'd spent weeks thinking about possible explanations, and I'd come up empty every time. Behind the photos were the documents. The background check on Jason Morales, complete with his criminal record, employment history, or lack thereof. And the best part, the outstanding child support order showing he owed $8,000 to his previous baby mama and hadn't paid a dime in over a year. I'd highlighted that part in yellow just to make sure she didn't miss it. Then came copies of her Planned Parenthood receipt, phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts between her and a number that Robert Kane had confirmed belonged to Jason, and bank statements showing ATM withdrawals and purchases in Tempe on days she'd claimed to be other places. Every piece of evidence was organized, labeled, and impossible to deny or explain away. The final documents in the envelope were the real kicker. Police reports that Robert had filed documenting the affair for legal purposes, DNA authorization forms that would be used after the baby was born to prove I wasn't the father, and photocopies of the divorce papers that Patricia had already prepared and would be filing on Monday morning. Everything was laid out in black and white, a complete roadmap of her affair and my exit strategy from this disaster of a marriage. I'd left nothing to chance. Every detail was documented, every meeting photographed, every lie exposed and highlighted and presented in a format that would hold up in any court in the state of Arizona. Clarissa's hands were shaking so badly that the papers were rustling, making this horrible crinkling sound that was the only noise in our little corner of the restaurant. Other diners were chatting and laughing, probably celebrating actual happy occasions, completely unaware of the nuclear bomb that had just detonated at table 12. Her face had gone from gray to red now, flushed with what I assumed was a mixture of embarrassment, shame, and panic. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and desperate, mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks that made her look like a raccoon who'd been caught stealing garbage. "Marco," she whispered, and her voice was barely audible over the background noise of the restaurant. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, sipping my champagne, watching her process the complete annihilation of whatever plan she'd been cooking up in that scheming brain of hers. She'd probably been planning to announce the pregnancy, let me get excited, and then just, what? Hope I never did the math. Hope I never found out. Maybe she'd been planning to claim the baby was premature when it was born looking nothing like me. Maybe she'd thought she could string me along for 9 months and then figure something out. Whatever her plan had been, it was lying in ruins on the table between us, mixed up with photos of her making out with an unemployed deadbeat. I can explain. She finally managed to choke out, which was probably the funniest thing she'd said all night. I almost laughed. Almost. But I managed to keep my composure, maintaining that calm smile that was driving her absolutely crazy because she couldn't read it. She couldn't tell if I was devastated or angry or just completely done with her. The answer was mostly the third one, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of knowing that. "Explain what?" I asked, my voice so casual you'd think we were discussing the weather or what movie to watch this weekend. "The baby or the community outreach program you started in his bed." That line had been Patricia's suggestion, actually. She'd said I needed to maintain some sense of humor about the situation or I'd drive myself crazy, and she'd been right. Watching Clarissa's face crumple at that joke made weeks of playing dumb and pretending everything was fine almost worth it. She started crying again, real ugly crying this time. Not the pretty tears from when she'd been announcing her big news. This was full-on sobbing, the kind that makes your whole body shake and your nose run and removes any last shred of dignity you might have been clinging to. "Please," she gasped between sobs. "Please, Marco, I can explain. It's not what it looks like. It looks like you've been having an affair with an unemployed deadbeat who can't even pay child support for his first kid, while lying to your husband and getting pregnant with said deadbeat's baby," I said, still maintaining that eerily calm tone. "So unless you've got a wildly different interpretation of these photos and documents, I think it's exactly what it looks like." I gestured to the papers spread across the table like evidence at a trial, which I guessed they would be soon enough. Our waiters started to approach the table, probably to take our dinner order, saw Clarissa crying and the documents everywhere, and immediately pivoted away like he'd walked in on something he absolutely was not paid enough to deal with. Smart man. Clarissa gathered up the photos and documents with shaking hands, shoving them back into the envelope like hiding the evidence would somehow make it not exist. But you can't unfind things. You can't unknow truths. You can't take back months of lying and cheating and destroying a marriage just because you got caught. How did you? She started to ask, but then trailed off, probably realizing that the how didn't really matter. It didn't matter whether I'd followed her or hired a private investigator or had psychic powers that revealed her affair. The end result was the same. I knew everything, and she was screwed. It doesn't matter how, I told her. What matters is that I know. And on Monday morning, Patricia Holt is filing divorce papers on my behalf. You'll be served sometime next week. Her face went pale again. Patricia Holt? The divorce lawyer? Even she knew who Patricia was, probably from seeing her billboards around Phoenix or hearing about her reputation for absolutely destroying cheating spouses in court. I nodded. The one and only. She's very thorough, very expensive, very good at what she does. I finished my champagne and set the glass down with a soft clink. Oh, and Jason, your baby daddy? You might want to let him know he's about to be a father again. Though based on his track record with the first kid, I'm guessing he'll be about as helpful as a screen door on a submarine. Clarissa stumbled outside the restaurant, crying into her hands like her world had just ended, which, to be fair, it kind of had. I followed her out calmly, watching her lean against the brick wall of La Verona while other diners stared at us through the windows, probably wondering what kind of drama was unfolding in the parking lot. I can explain, she sobbed, mascara running down her face in thick black streams that made her look like a sad clown at a birthday party nobody wanted to attend. I stopped a few feet away from her, hands in my pockets, completely calm. Explain what? I asked. The baby or the community outreach program you started in his bed. She flinched like I'd slapped her, which was almost satisfying enough to make up for months of headaches and fake exhaustion. Marco, please, she begged. I thought you'd never find out. I was going to end it. I was confused. It didn't mean anything. The baby was born in May. Court-ordered DNA test came back showing 0% chance it was mine, which surprised absolutely nobody except maybe Clarissa, who apparently thought miracles happened to people who don't deserve them. Jason vanished before the diaper fund even kicked in, because of course he did. Turns out owing child support for 2 kids instead of 1 was too much responsibility for a guy who couldn't even hold down a job at a car wash. Clarissa tried calling me months later, crying about the biggest mistake of her life. I answered on the 3rd ring, let her sob through her whole speech about regret and forgiveness and how she'd ruined everything. When she finally stopped to breathe, I said, yeah, sleeping with a broke Jason when you had a paid-off Marco, that's a tough one, and hung up before she could respond. I sold the house on Maple Street, moved to a condo in Scottsdale, and started dating again. This time, women who don't fake headaches or hide their phones or think unemployed deadbeats are worth destroying marriages for. The roses Clarissa planted in our front yard died right after she left. I didn't bother watering them. Some things aren't meant to bloom again.